Have you ever stood before the ruins of an ancient temple and tried to picture the scene, not just the grand columns or the worn stone, but the very air thick with expectation, the hushed whispers of a crowd waiting for a message from the gods? We all know the famous prophecies, the world-changing pronouncements from places like Delphi that echo through our history books. But what about everything that happened behind the curtain? What were the actual, tangible, and often utterly bizarre things an oracle had to do to channel a divine voice? The truth is, the public prophecies were just the very tip of a massive, hidden iceberg. For every famous prediction that shaped empires, there were dozens of secret rituals, strange preparations, and peculiar practices that defined the daily reality of these revered figures, methods so carefully guarded that most of them have been lost to the sands of time. Today, we're going on a journey to pull back that veil. We are diving deep into the archives of history and myth to uncover 30 hidden practices of the ancient oracles. This isn't just a list of facts, it's a rediscovery of a lost world. We're going to explore the secret diets that were believed to open the mind to the cosmos, the peculiar breathing techniques used to induce trance-like states, and the forbidden objects an oracle would handle in total secrecy. We'll uncover why some oracles chewed specific leaves for days before a reading, or why they slept in sacred caves on beds of particular herbs. We'll look at the strange symbols they carved into the undersides of their altars, the complex system of divination that used everything from the flight patterns of birds to the swirling of oil in a bowl of water, and the intense psychological conditioning that transformed an ordinary person into a vessel for the divine. These are the untold stories, the granular details of a life dedicated to interpreting the whispers of the universe, and they are far more fascinating and peculiar than you might have ever imagined. So, if you're ready to look beyond the famous lines of prophecy and step into the shadowy, mesmerizing world of what it truly took to be an oracle, you are in the right place. We are about to peel back the layers of myth and get our hands on the gritty, surprising, and often unbelievable reality. This is our exploration of human ingenuity, spiritual yearning, and the incredible lengths people went to in order to touch the divine. From the utterly practical to the mysteriously abstract, these 30 hidden practices will completely change the way you see these ancient figures, transforming them from distant, mythical names into complex, fascinating human beings with a job that was as strange as it was sacred. Let's begin. Our journey into these hidden practices begins not with a dramatic prophecy or a grand public ceremony, but with something far more intimate and universal, the act of sleep. This was not ordinary rest, however. The very first secret practice we uncover is known as incubation, a ritual of sacred sleep practiced in places like the Asclepieion at Epidaurus. Imagine yourself as a seeker, perhaps afflicted by a lingering illness that no physician could cure or desperate for a glimpse into your future. Your pilgrimage would end not with a loud proclamation, but with a quiet, deliberate process of preparation. For days beforehand, you would undergo rigorous purification. This meant fasting from certain foods, bathing in sacred springs, and offering prayers and sacrifices to Asclepius, the god of medicine. The goal was to cleanse the body and, more importantly, the mind, making it a receptive vessel for what was to come. This was the essential prelude, a way of signaling to the divine that you were ready to listen. As dusk fell, you would be led into a special hall called the Abaton, a place so sacred that its name literally means the inaccessible. Here, in this hushed and hallowed space, you would lie down on the skin of a sacrificed animal, perhaps a ram, and wait for sleep to take you. The air would be thick with the scent of burning incense and the palpable hope of dozens of other seekers lying nearby. This was the heart of the ritual. It was believed that during this sanctified sleep, the god Asclepius himself, or one of his sacred serpents, would visit you in a dream. These visitations weren't always straightforward. You might dream of the god touching your afflicted body part, or you might witness a series of powerful, confusing symbols, a twisting serpent, an overflowing cup, or a key turning in a lock. The dream itself was the divine message, a diagnosis or a prophecy delivered in the secret language of the subconscious. But the practice didn't end when you awoke with the dawn, your mind swirling with fragmented images. The final, crucial step involved a figure often overlooked in the popular tales of oracles, the dream interpreter. These priests were the cryptographers of the soul, trained to decipher the symbolic code of the gods. You would recount your dream to them in meticulous detail, and they would translate its meaning. A dream of a serpent might not signify danger, but rather the shedding of illness, just as a snake sheds its skin. A dream of a locked door opening could foretell a positive turn in your fate. The interpretation provided the necessary guidance, perhaps a prescription for a specific herb, a directive to bathe in a certain spring, or a warning about a future event. This entire, intricate process of incubation reveals a profound truth about ancient spirituality. The divine was not always accessed through ecstatic frenzy, but sometimes through profound, guided stillness. It shows us that the first tool in an oracle's hidden arsenal was the power of a prepared and interpreted dream, turning the vulnerability of sleep into a gateway for healing and foresight. Just as the quiet ritual of incubation used sleep as a doorway to the divine, other oracles sought to open that door through more dramatic, even volatile means. This brings us to the second hidden practice, one that lies at the very heart of the most famous prophetic site in the ancient world, the use of entheogenic fumes at the oracle of Delphi. For centuries, the image of the Pythia, the priestess of Apollo, sitting on her tripod and uttering earth-shattering prophecies has captivated us. But what was really happening in that dark, enclosed chamber? The public saw the result, the poetic, often cryptic prophecies, but the true mechanism was a closely guarded secret, a combination of geology, chemistry, and performance that transformed a woman into the voice of a god. Modern geological investigations have shed stunning light on this ancient mystery. The temple at Delphi was built directly upon a specific geological fault line. This was not a coincidence, it was the entire reason for the temple's location. From this fissure in the earth, traces of methane and ethylene gases would seep upward. Ethylene, in particular, is a sweet-smelling gas known to possess potent psychoactive properties. Inhaling even a small amount can induce a trance-like state, characterized by disorientation, euphoria, and violent physical reactions. This was the hidden fuel of the oracle. The Pythia would descend into the innermost sanctum of the temple, a restricted space known as the Aditon, which translates to the place not to be entered. Here, in this sacred and secluded chamber, she would sit on a three-legged stool positioned directly over the fissure, breathing in these intoxicating vapors that rose from the rock itself. The physical transformation was likely stark and unsettling. Historical accounts, though often veiled, describe the Pythia entering a state of violent possession. Her skin might have grown pale, her limbs would tremble uncontrollably, and her voice could shift from a whisper to a shriek. She was not calmly delivering perfectly composed hexameters. She was in the throes of a profound altered state, her conscious mind submerged as her body and vocal cords were gripped by the gas and the collective belief of the ancient world. The sounds she made in this condition were often raw and unintelligible, garbled words, frantic cries, and disjointed phrases. This is where the second layer of the hidden practice comes into play, moving the event from a solitary ecstatic experience to a carefully managed production. The Pythia did not work alone. Standing just outside the Aditon were the priests of Apollo, a group of highly educated men attuned to the political and social currents of the day. Their crucial, hidden role was to act as interpreters and translators. They would listen to the Pythia's frantic utterings and transcribe them, shaping the chaotic sounds into the formal, poetic Greek of the famous prophecies. This translation was not a simple, literal word-for-word conversion. It was an act of creative and political interpretation. The priests would mold the ambiguous cries into verses that were sufficiently vague to be applicable to multiple situations, or they might subtly steer the meaning to align with the political interests of powerful city-states like Athens or Sparta. The final prophecy, therefore, was not solely the voice of the god Apollo, nor was it purely the hallucinogenic ravings of the priestess. It was a collaborative creation, a fusion of chemical intoxication, religious theater, and shrewd political editing. This hidden machinery reveals that the great oracle of Delphi was as much a human institution as a divine one. Its power derived not just from a crack in the earth, but from the calculated interpretation of the chaos that emerged from it. Moving from the intoxicating fumes of Delphi to the reflective stillness of water, we come to our third hidden practice, one that found sacred meaning in the most ordinary of elements. This is hydromancy, the ancient art of scrying, of seeing the unseen by gazing into the shimmering, ever-changing surface of water. While the grand temples capture our imagination, some of the most profound divination happened with nothing more than a simple bowl filled from a local stream, or at the edge of a spring believed to be a direct conduit to the gods. The principle was deceptively simple. The water surface was seen as a thin veil, a boundary between our world and the realm of the divine. By staring into it with a prepared and focused mind, the oracle believed they could part that veil and perceive messages, symbols, and scenes of what was to come. The techniques employed in hydromancy were as varied as the practitioners themselves. Some oracles would begin with a vessel of perfectly still water, often poured from a special pitcher at a specific time of day. They would then gaze at the surface, not with their normal analytical vision, but with a soft, unfocused gaze, allowing their conscious mind to drift and their subconscious to rise. In this trance-like state, the subtle play of light on the water, the natural microscopic ripples, and the brain's own pattern-seeking ability would coalesce into visions. A flicker of reflected cloud might transform into a charging army. A dark patch in the bowl could be interpreted as a coming illness or a hidden betrayal. Other methods were more active. An oracle might drop a precious stone, a drop of oil, or even a handful of powdered gemstones into the water and intently watch the patterns they made as they sank or swirled. The direction of the swirl, the speed of descent, and the shapes the substances formed were all read as a complex symbolic language, a text written in liquid for those trained to understand it. One of the most celebrated centers for this practice was the Oracle of Didyma, dedicated to Apollo and rivaling even Delphi in its fame. Here, the source of prophecy was not a priestess on a tripod, but a sacred spring that welled up from deep within the earth. The prophetess at Didyma, after days of fasting and ritual purification, would descend to the water's edge. She wouldn't breathe in fumes. Instead, she would physically step into the sacred spring or drink from its waters, believed to be imbued with prophetic power. She would then gaze into the pool, her reflection merging with the hidden depths, and wait for the visions to arise. The reports suggest she received her prophecies not in a state of violent frenzy, but in a deep, trance-like stillness, her voice often described as hollow or distant, as if she were speaking from the other side of the water's surface itself. This points us to the most crucial and hidden aspect of hydromancy, the psychological state required to make it work. This was not simple daydreaming. It was a disciplined form of deep meditation and sensory deprivation. The oracle had to learn to quiet the internal chatter of their own thoughts, to suppress their personal desires and fears, and to become a blank slate. By focusing all their attention on the single, monotonous point of the water's surface, they would effectively shut out the external world. In this heightened state of receptive awareness, the boundary between the inner mind and the outer world would blur. The brain, desperate to find meaning in the sensory void, would begin to project images from the deep subconscious. It was from this well of inner symbolism, interpreted through years of training in mythological archetypes and traditional omens, that the prophecies were born. The water, then, was less a magical television screen and more a psychological tool, a catalyst that unlocked the oracle's own latent intuitive faculties, allowing them to access a layer of insight that was normally buried beneath the noise of everyday consciousness. While hydromancy invited the oracle to lose themselves in the reflective depths of a natural spring or a still pool, another ancient practice embraced a far more structured and interactive approach to water-based prophecy, one conducted not in nature but within the precise confines of a ritual bowl. This is lekonomancy, a term derived from the Greek word lekain, meaning a dish or a basin. At first glance, it might seem almost identical to hydromancy, but the distinction lies in the core methodology and the practitioner's role. Where hydromancy was largely about passive gazing and receptive vision, lekonomancy was an active, almost conversational form of divination. The oracle wasn't just looking at the water, they were interacting with it, prompting it for a response, and then interpreting the physical consequences of their actions. The ritual itself was a meticulous affair, steeped in tradition and precise preparation. The diviner would begin by selecting a specific bowl, often made of a particular material like polished bronze, silver, or even sacred stone. This vessel was not just a container, it was a ritual object consecrated for this single purpose. It would be filled with a pure liquid, sometimes water from a sacred well, but just as often with dark wine, shimmering olive oil, or even a pot of thick black ink. The choice of liquid altered the reading. Water might be used for general inquiries about the future, oil for questions of health and the body, and ink for uncovering secrets and hidden enemies. Once the bowl was prepared, the diviner would invoke the presence of a deity, calling upon a specific god or spirit to inhabit the liquid and guide the outcome. Then came the pivotal act, the dropping of objects into the center of the bowl. The items chosen were as significant as the liquid itself. Small, polished gemstones were a common choice, with each stone believed to carry its own vibrational energy. A lapis lazuli for truth, a carnelian for protection, a piece of hematite for grounding. Alternatively, a diviner might use coins, metal rings, or even folded slips of parchment inscribed with sacred symbols. The moment these objects hit the liquid surface, the oracle's intense observation began. This was a multi-sensory interpretation. First, there was the sound. Did the stone enter with a sharp, clean plink or a soft, muted splash? A clear, ringing sound might be interpreted as a positive affirmation, while a dull, thudding entry could signal rejection or bad news. Then the eyes would track the intricate ballet of physics and chants that followed. How did the ripples move out from the point of impact? Did they travel smoothly to the edges of the bowl, suggesting a clear and unobstructed path forward? Or did they collide chaotically with each other, hinting at conflict and confusion? The diviner would watch the patterns the sinking object made as it twisted and turned on its way down. A coin that spun rapidly might indicate swift change, while one that sank in a straight, direct line could point to a predictable outcome. If multiple items were used, the way they settled at the bottom of the bowl was also read. Did the stones cluster together or drift apart? Was one ring encircling another? Each configuration told a story, a symbolic snapshot of the current situation written in temporary, liquid geometry. This practice was not confined to one culture. It held a prominent place in the spiritual life of both Mesopotamia and ancient Egypt. In Mesopotamia, clay tablets describe lekonomancers working alongside other diviners in the royal court. They were consulted before military campaigns or the signing of important treaties, using their bowls to discern the will of the gods like Enki or Shamash. The patterns in the oil were believed to be a direct message from the divine, a celestial code that only the trained could crack. In Egypt, the practice was often linked to the goddess Hathor, and the bowls used were sometimes intricately carved with protective spells and deities' names, turning the vessel itself into a potent talisman. The key difference that made leconomancy so appealing across these civilizations was its controlled, ritualistic nature. Unlike the unpredictable and often overwhelming trance states of other oracles, leconomancy offered a structured framework. It provided a clear series of steps: prepare the bowl, invoke the god, drop the object, interpret the signs. This process gave both the diviner and the client a sense of active participation and tangible results, a collaborative effort to read the divine will through the elegant, transient language of splashes and swirls. From the delicate, interpretive art of reading water and oil, we now turn to a practice that was far more visceral and grounded in the tangible world of anatomy. This is the fifth hidden practice, horoscopes, the art and science of reading the future through the entrails, and specifically the livers of sacrificed animals. While the very idea might seem brutal or even grotesque to our modern sensibilities, for cultures like the Etruscans and later the Romans, this was not mere superstition. It was a highly sophisticated and systematic form of divine communication, a way of examining the very signature of the gods written in flesh and blood. The ritual was a central part of statecraft performed before any major military campaign, the founding of a new city, or the inauguration of a high-ranking official. The belief was simple yet profound. When an animal was offered to a god, the deity would accept the sacrifice and, in return, leave a message within the animal's organs. The liver, being the largest and most blood-rich organ, was considered the seat of life itself, and therefore the most direct mirror of the divine will. The Etruscans were the undisputed masters of this craft, and their conceptual framework was breathtaking in its complexity. They didn't see the liver as just a random piece of offal. They viewed it as a perfect microcosm of the entire universe. They believed the gods had divided the sky into 16 distinct regions, each under the patronage of a different deity. This celestial map was then meticulously projected onto the surface of the liver. The top of the liver corresponded to the northern sky, the bottom to the south, the right side to the east, and the left to the west. Every bump, lobe, and impression on the organ had a specific celestial counterpart. The main divide, a ridge known as the porta hepatis or gate of the liver, was seen as a fundamental boundary between favorable and unfavorable zones, much like the horizon divides the earth from the sky. This meant that a horoscope, the trained priest who performed the reading, wasn't just looking for good or bad signs. He was conducting a detailed topographic survey of the cosmos as reflected in a single organ. To master this incredibly detailed system, Etruscan novices didn't just learn on real animals. They trained using remarkable archaeological artifacts known as liver models. One of the most famous examples is the Piacenza liver, a bronze model from the 2nd century BC that is about the size of an adult human hand. This isn't a vague representation, it's a meticulously crafted teaching tool. The bronze liver is divided into 40+ sections, each one clearly labeled with the name of an Etruscan god. Mars is in his quadrant, Tinia, the Etruscan equivalent of Jupiter, is in his. A student would hold this model, memorizing the divine geography until he could look at any real liver and instantly identify which celestial region a particular mark or anomaly was affecting. This systematic approach transformed horoscopes from a vague mystical practice into a formal, almost scholarly discipline, requiring years of memorization and practical apprenticeship. So, what was the horoscope actually looking for during a sacrifice? Every single detail mattered. The very presence or absence of certain lobes was a primary indicator. A missing lobe, or one that was unusually small, was considered an extremely dire omen, suggesting that the god to whom that region was dedicated was absent or hostile. Conversely, a large, robust, and well-formed lobe was a sign of divine favor, but the examination went far deeper. The texture and color of the organ were critically important. A smooth, healthy, reddish-brown liver was the ideal, signaling universal approval from the gods. any deviation was a message. A pale, bloodless liver might indicate weakness or impending failure in the venture at hand. A liver that was dark, almost black, or covered in strange spots was a terrifying portent of disaster, death, or divine wrath. They would scrutinize the gallbladder, its size and placement, and even the configuration of the veins and arteries on the liver's surface, believing that these patterns could reveal the specific timing of an event or the identity of an enemy. The influence of this practice on state decisions cannot be overstated. In the Roman Republic and later the Empire, no consul would think of leading a legion into battle without the favorable reading of the horoscopes. The process was integral to the machinery of government. Before a crucial vote in the Senate, a sacrifice would be made. If the liver showed any flaws or negative signs, the proceedings could be postponed for days or even abandoned entirely. There are historical accounts of generals delaying entire military campaigns because the initial sacrifice yielded a hostile liver, waiting sometimes for weeks until a series of perfect livers gave them the green light from the gods. This practice provided a crucial, non-human source of authority. It allowed leaders to justify difficult decisions by pointing to a divine mandate written in undeniable physical form. It also offered a way to manage risk and uncertainty. If the gods themselves were signaling caution through a diseased liver, it was politically safer for a ruler to heed that warning than to charge ahead relying solely on their own fallible judgment. In this way, the gruesome, methodical dissection of a single sheep's liver could literally alter the course of empires, directing the fate of nations through a language of lobes, spots, and veins that connected the earthly realm directly to the divine. Now, let's shift from the intricate internal maps of the liver to a practice that, on its surface, seems almost comically simple, yet was followed with absolute conviction by one of the most powerful empires the world has ever known. This is the sixth hidden practice, electromancy, also known as the oracle of the sacred chicken. In the highly structured world of Roman state divination, alongside the complex art of horoscopy, existed this remarkably straightforward ritual. It involved a small coop of chickens, specially consecrated and cared for by the military's Polarius or chicken keeper. Before any significant battle, these sacred birds would be taken from their cage and presented with a special meal of pulse, a type of cake made from grain. The entire fate of a military campaign could then hinge on the bird's appetite. If the chickens ate greedily, especially if they let bits of food fall from their beaks in a gesture called tripudium, the omen was spectacularly good, signaling the full support of the gods. But if the birds were listless, pecked without enthusiasm, or in the worst-case scenario refused to eat at all, it was a dire portent of certain defeat. The sheer simplicity of this method begs the question, why would the pragmatic, disciplined Roman military put such stock in the feeding habits of poultry? The answer lies in the Roman concept of pax deorum, or the peace of the gods. For the Romans, maintaining a harmonious relationship with the divine was not a matter of personal faith, but a contractual obligation essential for the survival of the state. The gods provided favors, military victory, good harvests, public health, and in return, the Romans owed them precise rituals and unwavering observance. Electromancy was a direct, unambiguous test of that relationship. The chickens, as sacred animals, were living barometers of divine favor. Their enthusiastic eating was a clear yes from the gods. Their refusal to eat was an undeniable no. To ignore such a clear sign was not just bad strategy. It was an act of impiety that risked bringing down divine wrath upon the entire army and the republic itself. This belief system gave the ritual its immense power, transforming a barnyard scene into a moment of high religious and political drama. No story better illustrates the deadly seriousness of this practice and the catastrophic consequences of ignoring it than the infamous tale of the consul Publius Claudius Pulcher during the First Punic War. In the year 249 BC, Claudius was in command of a Roman fleet poised to launch a surprise attack on the Carthaginian navy at the Battle of Drepana. As was absolutely required, the Polarius brought forth the sacred chickens and offered them their ceremonial meal. But the birds, perhaps seasick from the rocking of the ships, turned their beaks away from the food. They refused to eat. For the superstitious crew and soldiers, this was a moment of pure terror. The gods had explicitly withdrawn their support. The planned attack, in their eyes, was now doomed. Confronted with this mutiny by his own poultry, the arrogant and impetuous Claudius did not simply cancel the attack. In a moment of breathtaking defiance that would become legendary, he snatched the sacred chickens from their coop, hurled them overboard into the sea, and declared with savage sarcasm, "If they won't eat, then let them drink." The outcome was as swift as it was disastrous. Ignoring the divine warning, Claudius ordered his fleet to attack. The Romans, their morale shattered by their commander's sacrilege, were soundly defeated by the Carthaginians in a humiliating rout. The Roman fleet was almost completely destroyed, and Claudius himself narrowly escaped capture. Upon his return to Rome, he was not just criticized for his poor military judgment, he was put on trial for the capital crime of impiety. His act of drowning the sacred chickens was seen as the direct cause of the naval catastrophe and the deaths of thousands of Roman citizens. This event seared itself into the Roman historical consciousness as a perfect object lesson in the dangers of disregarding the will of the gods, no matter how trivial the method of its delivery might seem. It demonstrates that for the Romans, the authority of an oracle did not necessarily come from the complexity of its ritual, but from the unshakable cultural belief that backed it. The sacred chickens were not just birds, they were a vital link in the chain of command between the Senate and the heavens, and to break that link was to invite utter ruin. Moving from the straightforward appetite of sacred chickens to the primal and mesmerizing power of flame, we encounter our seventh and eighth hidden practices, which are deeply intertwined: pyromancy and capnomancy. These are the arts of reading the future not in flesh or water, but in the ever-changing dance of fire and smoke. For the ancient mind, fire was a sacred paradox. It provided warmth and safety, yet it was also a terrifying, destructive force. It was a tangible piece of the sun on earth, a bridge between the human world and the realm of the gods, and its behavior was believed to be a direct expression of divine will. An oracle practicing pyromancy would not simply stare into a campfire. They would engage in a complex, ritualized dialogue with the flames, learning to interpret a language written in light, heat, and movement. The ritual began long before the first spark was lit. The choice of fuel was absolutely critical, with each type of wood or offering believed to attract the attention of a specific deity or to open a channel for a particular kind of knowledge. For instance, sacred oak, associated with Zeus and Jupiter, was burned for questions of leadership, justice, and matters of state. Apple wood might be used for inquiries about love and relationships, its sweet, fragrant smoke inviting benevolent spirits. Pine, with its crackling resin, was often chosen for purification rituals and to dispel negative energies. But it wasn't just wood. Oracles would add specific offerings to the flames: handfuls of aromatic herbs like laurel for Apollo, myrrh for the gods of the underworld, or even precious resins like frankincense, whose rich, thick smoke was seen as a direct pathway to the highest heavens. The very act of building the fire was a meditation, with the wood arranged in a specific configuration, sometimes in the shape of a symbol or within a consecrated pit that represented the center of the world. Once the fire was blazing, the practice of pyromancy began in earnest. The oracle would focus their complete attention on the heart of the flames, watching for distinct shapes and colors. This required a profound state of concentration, a kind of waking dream where the flickering light and shadow would coalesce into meaningful images. A flame that suddenly flared up into a tall, steady column might be interpreted as a sign of ascension, success, or a positive answer. If the fire split into two separate peaks, it could signify a coming conflict or a difficult choice. The colors within the fire were another vital layer of the message. A bright, clear, yellow-white flame was universally positive, but a fire that burned with a sullen, red glow, or most ominously, with flashes of blue or green at its core, was a dire warning of treachery, illness, or divine displeasure. Some traditions held that if an oracle saw the shape of a specific animal in the flames, a leaping wolf for danger, a soaring eagle for victory, it provided a crucial detail about the nature of the coming event. As the fire began to die down and the logs turned to embers, the focus of the ritual would subtly shift from pyromancy to its sister art, hydromancy, the reading of smoke. This was considered an even more subtle and refined form of communication, as smoke was seen as the very breath of the offering, the essence of the sacrifice rising up to the gods. The oracle would watch the nascent plume with an almost microscopic intensity. The direction of the smoke was the first and most critical reading. Smoke that rose straight up in a thin, unwavering column was the best possible omen, a clear signal that the gods had accepted the offering and were pleased. But if the smoke drifted heavily to the east, it might mean the gods favored an enemy, while smoke coiling to the west could indicate a journey or an ending. The texture and behavior of the smoke provided the next layer of interpretation. Thin, wispy smoke that dissipated quickly might suggest that the answer to a question was unclear or that the matter was trivial. In stark contrast, thick, heavy smoke that clung to the ground before slowly rising was a powerful omen, often linked to chthonic or underworld deities, and could signify hidden truths coming to light or a need to consult the ancestors. The most skilled oracles would watch for the way the smoke swirled and formed into temporary shapes before vanishing into the air. A spiral of smoke might be seen as a symbol of fate twisting in a new direction. A plume that momentarily resembled a grasping hand could warn of a theft or a betrayal. Another that formed a circle might promise completion or a successful return. This practice required an incredible visual imagination and a deep familiarity with symbolic language, turning the ephemeral, intangible smoke into a canvas for divine portraiture. These oracles understood that the messages of the gods were not always spoken in words. Sometimes they were painted on the air itself, in fleeting masterpieces of vapor and ash that lasted only a second before being lost to the wind. But for all the grandeur of state-sponsored sacrifices and the interpretation of dramatic natural signs, the need for divine guidance was not confined to kings and generals. The average person in the ancient world also yearned for a glimpse of their fate, for answers about love, health, and livelihood, and they turned to a practice that was both profoundly personal and deceptively simple: astrogallomancy, the casting of dice, or more specifically, knuckle bones. This brings us to the eighth hidden practice, a form of divination that transformed a common animal bone into a direct line to the gods. The primary tool was the astrogallus, a small, rectangular bone from the hock of a sheep or goat. Its unique, asymmetrical shape with four distinct, well-defined sides made it perfect for casting, and its connection to a sacrificed animal gave it a sacred character. These bones weren't just random game pieces, they were considered vessels of chants, and chants was the unmistakable language of the divine will. The ritual of a casting was intimate and accessible. An individual or a local seer working on their behalf would take a set of 5 astrogalli, often kept in a special pouch or box. Before the throw, they would concentrate on their question, holding the bones tightly in their cupped hands, sometimes whispering their inquiry to them as if the bones themselves could carry the message upwards. Then, with a focused toss onto a flat stone or a cloth marked with symbols, they would release the bones, their clatter against the hard surface marking the moment the god spoke. The answer wasn't written in poetry or seen in a vision. It was encoded in the specific combination of ways the bones landed. Each of the 4 long sides of the astrogallus had a name and a value. The broad, curved side was called the brain or belly and was assigned the lowest value, often 1. The opposite, narrower side was the shun or back, valued at 3. The two concave ends were the most significant. One flat and wide was the hip shun or broad, valued at 4, and the most prized side, the coon or dog, was a small, tricky indentation valued at 6. A single throw of 5 bones could thus produce a vast array of numerical combinations, each with its own specific name and meaning, forming a complex lexicon of fate. So, what did the gods say through these tumbling bones? A throw where 3 or more landed with the prized coon, or 6, face up, was called the Venus throw and was the best possible outcome, signaling divine favor, success in love, and general good fortune. In stark contrast, a throw where most bones showed the prane, or 1, was known as the dog throw and was considered a disastrous omen of poverty, bad luck, and failure. But the interpretations went far beyond simple good or bad. Specific combinations were believed to answer specific types of questions. A mix of 4s and 6s might indicate a successful journey, while a combination dominated by 3s could warn of delays and obstacles. A seeker asking about a potential marriage might look for a balanced throw, while someone inquiring about a business venture would hope for high numbers signifying profit. This system provided a tangible, immediate response to the anxieties of daily life, offering a moment of clarity and a sense of agency in an uncertain world. This practice was wildly popular across the ancient Mediterranean, from the markets of Greece to the villas of Rome, precisely because it was so democratic. Unlike the Oracle of Delphi, which was often reserved for the wealthy and powerful, or the state-controlled art of haruspicy, hydromancy was for everyone. It required no grand temple, no expensive animal sacrifice, and no specialized priesthood, though skilled interpreters were often sought for their deep knowledge of the countless combinations. You could carry your set of knuckle bones with you, consulting them at a crossroads before a market day or about a family matter. This personal connection is a crucial part of its enduring legacy. The very human desire to find pattern and meaning in randomness, to seek a sign when faced with a difficult choice, is a thread that connects the ancient knucklebone player to the modern person rolling dice in a board game or pulling the lever on a slot machine. The fundamental mechanics of chance and our enduring fascination with it haven't changed. We may no longer believe that a die's landing reveals the will of Zeus, but the thrill of the throw, the anticipation as the cubes tumble, and the immediate, unambiguous result all echo a tradition that is thousands of years old. The knucklebones of the ancients have evolved into the polyhedral dice of today's role-playing games, where a roll of a 20-sided die can still feel, in its own way, like a moment of fate. In this simple act of casting lots, we see a universal human impulse, the hope that the universe might just give us a clear, numerical answer when we need it most. While the knucklebones provided answers for personal matters on the ground, the Roman state looked to the heavens for its most authoritative guidance, turning the sky itself into a divine message board through the practice of ornithomancy. This was the art of interpreting the will of the gods through the flight, songs, and behavior of birds, and it was a discipline governed by a highly specialized and powerful figure, the augur. Unlike the chaotic frenzy of the Pythia or the internal visions of a dream interpreter, ornithomancy was a methodical, almost bureaucratic process, rooted in the belief that Jupiter, the king of the gods, used birds as his celestial messengers. The movement of a single bird across a specific quadrant of the sky could determine whether a law was passed, a war was declared, or a new leader was installed. This wasn't mere superstition. It was a complex science of observation with a formal language and a rigid set of rules that gave it an air of absolute authority. The augur himself was a central pillar of Roman political life, a priest whose official pronouncements could bring the machinery of the state to a complete halt. His primary tool was the litus, a distinctively curved staff without any sharp angles, used not as a magical wand but as a precise surveying instrument. Before any important public event, the augur would ascend a sacred hill or a specially designated open space called a templum. There, with the utmost solemnity, he would use his staff to trace out an invisible but ritually crucial grid across the dome of the sky. He would divide the celestial sphere into 4 primary regions, left and right, front and back, with each sector carrying a specific symbolic weight. The left side, or pars familiaris, was generally considered favorable, representing the east and the rising sun. The right side, pars hostilis, was often unfavorable, linked to the west and the setting sun. This created a sacred map against which the flight of birds would be plotted and interpreted. The process required immense concentration and a trained eye, as the augur had to note not just the bird's direction, but its altitude, speed, and any changes in its behavior the moment it crossed his ritually defined boundary. Not all birds carried the same weight in this celestial vocabulary. The Romans classified them into 2 main categories, each with its own specialty. The first were the alites, or bird watchers, whose primary message was encoded in their flight patterns. The eagle, sacred to Jupiter, was the most powerful and respected of all. Its appearance alone was a significant event, but its flight path was paramount. An eagle flying high and crossing the augur's defined sector from the favorable left was the strongest possible affirmation, a direct blessing from the king of the gods for the proposed action. In stark contrast, an eagle approaching from the right and then suddenly veering away was a catastrophic omen, signaling Jupiter's explicit disapproval. The second category were the oscines, the singing birds, whose messages were delivered through their calls. Here, the crow and the raven were particularly potent. A crow cawing from the left was a good sign, while one calling from the right was a warning. The specific number of calls, the rhythm, and even the tone were all factored into the final interpretation. The owl, with its nocturnal habits and haunting call, was almost universally seen as a portent of doom, its appearance foretelling death, defeat, or a terrible calamity. This system's true power lay in its inherent flexibility and its deep integration with Roman politics. Because the signs were open to interpretation, a skilled augur could wield tremendous influence. A politically savvy augur, aligned with a particular faction in the Senate, could observe unfavorable bird signs to delay a vote or block the appointment of a rival, all under the unimpeachable guise of carrying out the god's will. There's a famous historical account of the consul Gaius Flaminius, who in 217 BC was determined to engage the Carthaginian general Hannibal. The augurs reported a series of terrible omens. The sacred chickens refused to eat, the sacrificial liver was diseased, and most dramatically, the army's standards were reportedly stuck fast in the ground and could not be moved. Flaminius, much like Claudius Pulcher with the chickens, chose to ignore these warnings, believing them to be political tools of his opponents. He led his army out anyway and was decisively defeated at the Battle of Lake Trasimene, where he himself was killed. This event was later cited as definitive proof of the system's validity, demonstrating that the warnings were real and that ignoring them brought ruin. Ornithomancy, therefore, was more than just bird watching. It was a vital check on human ambition, a way of subjecting the plans of even the most powerful men to a higher celestial authority, ensuring that no major state action proceeded without at least the perceived consent of the gods. We've explored how sleep itself could become a sacred act in incubation, but what happened when the dream arrived? That's where our 10th hidden practice begins, hydromancy, the formal and highly sophisticated art of dream interpretation. This was far more than just trying to remember a strange nightmare upon waking. It was a disciplined system for decoding what the ancients believed were deliberate messages sent by the gods, the dead, or even one's own soul journeying into other realms while the body rested. For an oracle, a dream wasn't a random firing of neurons. It was a coded text, a divine dispatch that required a skilled cryptographer to unlock its true meaning. This practice elevated dreaming from a personal experience to a professional tool, one that required extensive training and access to vast repositories of symbolic knowledge. The first step in this intricate process was categorization. Ancient dream interpreters didn't treat every dream as equally significant. They developed complex typologies to separate mundane mental chatter from genuine prophetic visions. One of the most influential systems came from Artemidorus of Daldes, who wrote the Wonera Critica, a massive dream dictionary in the 2nd century CE. He classified dreams into two primary types. The first was the enhypnion, a common dream that simply reflected the dreamer's daily life, their anxieties, desires, or physical state. A dream about being thirsty, for instance, was just that and held no deeper prophetic meaning. The second and vastly more important type was the Woneros. This was the true prophetic dream, a message about the future sent from a divine source, but even within this category there were further distinctions. Some Woneroi were theorematic, meaning they depicted events exactly as they would happen. If you dreamed of your own ship sinking, you cancelled your voyage. Others were allegorical, where the events and images were symbolic stand-ins for the actual outcome. A dream of a crumbling city wall might not foretell an invasion, but the serious illness of a government leader. This system of classification was the oracle's first filter, a way to determine which nocturnal visions were worth the intense labor of interpretation and which could be safely ignored. To decipher these allegorical dreams, oracles and professional interpreters relied on extensive dream dictionaries, which were essentially the ancient world's search engines for symbolic meaning. These texts were incredibly detailed, listing hundreds of common dream motifs and their potential meanings, which could vary dramatically based on the dreamer's gender, social status, and profession. For example, dreaming of an eagle was generally a positive omen of power and success, but for a king, it might specifically mean expanding his territory, while for a common farmer, it could predict the birth of a strong and ambitious son. Similarly, dreaming of losing a tooth was a famously bad sign, but its precise meaning shifted. For a wealthy merchant, it could mean a financial loss was coming. For a politician, it might signal a loss of reputation or influence, and for a sick person, it was often interpreted as a direct omen of impending death. The skill of the interpreter lay not just in knowing these general meanings, but in applying them with nuance, weaving together the various symbols from a single dream into a coherent and personalized narrative of the future. This practice was by no means confined to a single culture. One of the most famous examples comes from the Hebrew Bible with the story of Joseph in Egypt. Joseph's entire rise from enslaved prisoner to the Pharaoh's chief vizier hinges on his preternatural skill as a woneromancer. When Pharaoh is tormented by two powerful dreams, one of 7 fat cows being devoured by 7 skinny cows, and another of 7 healthy ears of grain consumed by 7 withered ears, none of his own wise men can provide a satisfactory interpretation. Joseph is summoned from prison and doesn't just give a vague meaning, he decodes the specific allegory. He explains that the two dreams are one and the same, a theorematic message from God that 7 years of unbelievable agricultural abundance will be followed by 7 years of catastrophic famine. But he doesn't stop at the interpretation. He immediately offers a practical solution, advising Pharaoh to store grain during the plentiful years to survive the lean ones. This story perfectly illustrates the immense political power a skilled dream interpreter could wield. Joseph wasn't just a mystic, he was a strategic advisor whose woneromantic skill directly shaped the economic policy of the most powerful empire in his world, saving millions from starvation. His story shows that the hidden practice of dream interpretation could, in the right hands, alter the fate of nations as decisively as any army or oracle breathing sacred fumes. While the augurs of Rome fixed their gaze on the birds tracing paths across the celestial map, a different kind of oracle kept their eyes firmly on the ground, finding profound meaning in the very dirt beneath their feet. This is geomancy, our 11th hidden practice, the art of reading the Earth's patterns. It stands in stark contrast to the grand, state-sponsored rituals, representing a form of divination that was profoundly democratic, accessible to anyone from a nomadic herder to a village farmer. Its tools weren't precious metals or sacrificed animals, but the most humble materials imaginable. A patch of bare earth, a handful of tossed pebbles, the random cracks in sun-baked clay, or even the intricate trails left by a colony of ants. The core belief was that the earth was a living, breathing entity, and its surface was a vast canvas upon which the divine will, the spirits of the land, and the forces of fate constantly wrote their messages. The geomancer's skill lay in knowing how to read that ever-changing text. The methods were wonderfully diverse, each with its own unique ritual and interpretive framework. One of the most common involved preparing a smooth patch of soil, often in a quiet, consecrated spot. The diviner would then take a handful of pebbles or a special staff and mark random dots or lines in the earth. From this seemingly chaotic starting point, a complex process of counting and configuration would begin. The geomancer would count the marks in each row, determining if they were odd or even, and from this binary foundation build an intricate chart of figures. Each of these 16 possible primary figures had a name, a set of attributes, and a symbolic meaning relating to elements, planets, and archetypal human situations. For instance, a figure called via, meaning the way, composed of all even numbers, signified journeys, change, and the need for adaptability. Its opposite, populus, the people, made of all odd numbers, pointed to matters of the community, public opinion, and collective events. This system transformed simple random marks into a structured symbolic language as complex as any celestial map. In other traditions, the oracle didn't create the marks but observed those made by nature itself. They would find a patch of mud from a recent rain and watch intently as the sun dried it, interpreting the network of cracks that formed. A pattern of deep, jagged fissures radiating from a central point might be read as a warning of conflict or a sudden rupture in the social fabric of a village. A series of fine, interconnected lines, on the other hand, could signify a web of gossip or a complex but manageable situation requiring diplomacy. Some geomancers took this observation to an even more minute level, studying the behavior of insects. They would leave a small offering of grain and observe the path that ants took to carry it away. A straight, direct line to the nest was a positive sign of clear intentions and successful endeavors. A chaotic, meandering trail, however, suggested confusion, obstacles, and wasted effort. This practice required an almost supernatural patience and a deep, intimate knowledge of the local environment, understanding that every creature, from the smallest ant to the very soil, played a part in a grand, interconnected symphony of signs. The global reach of geomancy is a testament to its powerful, intuitive appeal. It found a particularly sophisticated and enduring form in the Arabic tradition, where it is known as ilm al-ramal, or the science of the sand. Islamic geomancers developed this practice into a highly elaborate and respected discipline, with scholarly texts written about its theory and practice. They often used a dustboard, a tray filled with fine sand, upon which they would make random dots with a stylus while focusing on their question. The resulting figures were not just interpreted for simple yes or no answers. They were used to create a full geomantic chart, or shield, that could provide insights into the past, present, and future of any situation, from the outcome of a battle to the health of a child. This structured, almost mathematical approach gave it immense credibility in the medieval Islamic world, where it was studied by philosophers and astronomers alongside other sciences. Simultaneously, across the African continent, diverse forms of geomancy flourished, deeply woven into the spiritual and social life of countless cultures. The Ifa divination system of the Yoruba people, for example, is one of the most complex geomantic systems in the world. A babalawo, a senior priest of Ifa, uses a divination tray and a chain of 8 halves of coconut shells or sacred palm nuts. When cast, the configuration of these pieces creates one of 256 possible odu, or canonical chapters, each a vast repository of poetry, stories, and teachings that provide specific guidance and reveal the will of the Orishas, the divine spirits of the Yoruba religion. This is not a simple fortune-telling game. It is a deep philosophical consultation that connects the individual client to centuries of accumulated wisdom and spiritual precedent. The fact that such a nuanced system developed independently, yet shares the core geomantic principle of deriving complex meaning from simple terrestrial marks, highlights a universal human truth. From the deserts of Arabia to the forests of West Africa, people looked down and saw not just dirt but a living scripture, a universal language of pattern and symbol that offered guidance to those patient and wise enough to learn its grammar. Now we shift from the open, earthly wisdom of geomancy to a far darker, more secretive corner of the ancient world, a practice born not from seeking guidance, but from the raw human emotions of anger, jealousy, and the desperate desire for control. This is the 12th hidden practice, the creation of curse tablets, known in the ancient world as depictions, from the Latin word meaning to bind or to fasten. Imagine the sting of a rival winning a court case against you through lies, the agony of watching the person you love marry someone else, or the bitter frustration of a business competitor stealing your clients. In a world without legal recourse for many personal grievances, some people turn to a different kind of justice, a supernatural one, enacted through a ritual that was as chilling as it was methodical. The process began with a small, thin sheet of lead, a metal associated with the chthonic or underworld deities due to its cold, heavy nature. This was not a public act, it was a clandestine operation, often performed under the cover of night or with the assistance of a specialized practitioner who knew the precise formulas. The client, boiling with their grievance, would have their curse meticulously inscribed onto the soft metal. They didn't use ink. They scratched the words directly into the lead using a sharp stylus, often in a spiraling, cramped script that wound its way from the edges toward the center, visually mirroring the act of trapping and constricting the victim. The language of these curses was brutally direct and shockingly personal. They weren't vague pleas for bad luck, they were specific, violent, and graphic. A typical legal curse might read something like, "I bind Tertius, his tongue, his mind, and his legal strategies. Just as this lead is cold and useless, so too may his words before the magistrate be cold and useless. May he be mute and confused. In matters of love, a jilted lover might seek to bind a rival, saying, 'I bind Flora from all pleasure and from the bed of Gaius.' May she be as repulsive to him as rot and decay until she departs from this city." But the words alone were not enough. The true power of the defixio was believed to be activated by its delivery system, its deposition into a place that served as a direct channel to the gods and spirits of the underworld. The most common places to leave these cursed tablets were graves, especially the graves of those who had died prematurely or violently, as their spirits were thought to be restless and more willing to carry out such malevolent tasks. The person would sneak into a cemetery, find a suitable fresh burial, and push the lead sheet deep into the grave, often nailing it down with an iron nail to symbolically pin the curse in place. Alternatively, they would throw the tablet into a deep, dark well or a sacred spring, believing the water would carry their plea down into the subterranean realms where the chthonic gods like Hades, Persephone, or Hecate held sway. The final, chilling act was often to twist or roll the lead sheet tightly, physically binding it just as they sought to bind their victim before consigning it to the darkness. What makes this practice so fascinating and tangible for us today is that archaeology has recovered hundreds of these cursed tablets from across the Greco-Roman world. We can hold them in our hands, feeling the cold weight of the lead and tracing the frantic, angry scratches with our own eyes. One famous example from Roman Britain, known as the Tablet of Saturnina, invokes the god Mercury to inflict a horrible skin disease upon a woman named Vitalis, whose exact offense we can only guess at. Another, from a spring in modern-day Germany, targets a thief, listing the stolen items and cursing the perpetrator until the goods are returned. These artifacts are raw, unfiltered snapshots of human despair and vengeance, a direct line to the visceral emotions of ordinary people who felt they had no other option. They reveal a hidden, shadow side of ancient spirituality, where the oracle's role wasn't always to bring light and guidance, but could also be to channel the darkest human impulses into a ritual that promised, if not justice, then at least a terrifying and satisfying revenge. From the shadowy realm of binding curses, we now venture into the most forbidden and terrifying of all ancient prophetic arts, a practice that crossed the ultimate boundary between the living and the deceased. This is necromancy, the 13th hidden practice, which literally means the prophecy of the dead. It was the belief that the spirits of the departed possessed knowledge inaccessible to the living, a clear view of the past, present, and future from their timeless perspective. To summon a ghost and compel it to speak was to access the ultimate oracle, but it was a path fraught with immense spiritual danger and moral taboo, reserved only for the most desperate or the most daring. The rituals of necromancy were not performed lightly or in any common location. They required a specific, charged environment, a place where the veil between worlds was considered tissue-thin. The most famous of these sites was the Necromanteon, the Oracle of the Dead, located on the banks of the river Akron in northwestern Greece. The Akron was one of the 5 mythical rivers of the underworld, and its very name meant River of Woe. To journey to this remote and foreboding temple was to enact a symbolic descent into Hades itself. A seeker or psychagogue, a soul leader, would undergo days of intense preparation before even attempting the ritual. This involved a strict diet of broad beans, lentils, and narcotic substances believed to open the mind to the spirit world, all while living in total darkness to disorient the senses and blur the line between reality and the spectral realm. This was not just purification, it was a systematic dismantling of the seeker's connection to the world of the living, making them a suitable vessel to host a conversation with the dead. Inside the Necromanteon's central chamber, a labyrinthine structure built to confuse malevolent spirits, the actual ceremony would begin under the cover of night. The air would be thick with the smoke of libations poured for the chthonic gods Hades, Persephone, and Hecate, the queen of witchcraft. The primary offering was not a simple prayer, it was a blood sacrifice, most often a black ram or a ewe. The belief was that the shades, the spirits of the dead, were withered and feeble, drawn to and temporarily strengthened by the hot, steaming blood of the newly slain animal, which represented the vibrant life force they so desperately craved. The blood would be collected in a special pit or bothrows, and as it seeped into the earth, the necromancer would chant powerful incantations, calling upon the gods of the underworld to grant passage to a specific spirit or to send forth any shade that could answer their burning question. But one never entered such an encounter unprotected. The most critical part of the ritual was the creation of a protective barrier. The necromancer would draw a perfect circle on the ground, often with a consecrated dagger or a wand of cypress wood, a tree sacred to the rulers of the underworld. Inside this circle, they would inscribe powerful symbols and the names of protective deities. This was not a mere formality, it was a spiritual fortress. The belief was that the summoned spirit, often confused and angry at being disturbed, could turn violently on the summoner, attempting to drag them back into the land of the dead or to possess their body. The circle served as an impenetrable wall, containing the spectral energy and keeping the living practitioner safe from the grasping hands of the deceased. To step outside this circle before properly dismissing the spirit was considered a death sentence. The risks, however, went far beyond a single malevolent ghost. The primary fear was that by tearing a hole in the fabric separating the worlds, the necromancer could inadvertently create a permanent gateway, allowing a flood of restless, hungry spirits to pour into our world. There were also tales of divine punishment, of Hades himself taking offense at this theft of his subjects and cursing the practitioners with madness, sterility, or a death marked by eternal torment. The knowledge gained from the dead was believed to come with a terrible price, a lingering spiritual pollution, a miasma that could cling to the necromancer and everyone they associated with, bringing sickness and misfortune for years to come. This practice represents the absolute extreme of the oracle's quest for knowledge, a willingness to stare into the abyss and risk being consumed by it, all for a chance to hear a whisper of truth from the silent realm of the dead. After confronting the restless dead in the dark of the necromantean, one might think no other oracle could feel more immediate, more shocking. Yet, the ancient world held another profound, and for many more accessible, wonder: the speaking statue. This 14th hidden practice revolves around the belief that a god could inhabit their own physical image, turning a carved piece of stone, wood, or metal into a living, breathing source of divine counsel. Imagine standing in a dimly lit temple, the air heavy with incense, your eyes fixed on the towering, majestic statue of a deity. Then a voice, deep, resonant, and seemingly emanating from the stone itself, begins to speak your name and answer your most secret question. The psychological impact was staggering, a direct and personal encounter with the divine that could shatter a supplicant's worldview and bind them to the oracle's authority for life. The mechanisms behind this miracle were as ingenious as they were varied, spanning a spectrum from pure theatrical trickery to profound, genuine faith. On one end, we have the clever engineering that would make any modern stage magician nod in appreciation. Historical accounts and archaeological evidence point to the use of hidden tubes, often made of bronze or lead, running from a concealed chamber behind or beneath the statue, through its body, and out through a discreet opening near the statue's mouth. A priest, hidden from view and highly trained in vocal projection and improvisation, would speak into the tube. The acoustics of the stone chamber would transform his voice, giving it a hollow, echoing quality that sounded utterly unearthly. In some larger temples, there might even be a system of multiple tubes, allowing for a kind of divine dialogue where questions could be whispered into one tube near the statue's ear, and the god's answer would emerge from the mouth. This wasn't considered fraud in the modern sense. It was seen as a necessary technology, a tool to help bridge the immense gap between humanity and the gods, making the divine presence tangibly real for the worshipper. Yet, for many priests and believers alike, this was far more than a simple trick. The statue itself was not just a hollow speaker box, it was a sacred object that had undergone meticulous rituals of consecration. In a process known as opening the mouth, priests would perform elaborate ceremonies to invite the deity's spirit to dwell within the crafted image. They would anoint the statue with precious oils, dress it in fine linens, and offer it food and drink as if it were a living being. The belief was that through these repeated rituals, intense prayer, and the collective faith of the community, the statue became a true vessel, a habitatio for the god's power. In this context, the hidden priest speaking through the tube was not an impostor, but a divinely chosen instrument. He was a medium, entering a trance-like state to allow the god to speak through him, using his vocal cords as the deity used the stone body. The line between human artifice and genuine divine possession was blurred beyond recognition, even for the practitioners themselves. The voice from the statue was the god's voice, regardless of the physical mechanism that produced it. This practice was most famously associated with the Colossus of Memnon in Egypt, one of two massive stone statues of Pharaoh Amenhotep III. After an earthquake damaged the northern statue in 27 BC, a remarkable phenomenon began. Every morning at dawn, as the rising sun's rays warmed the cold stone, the statue would emit a distinct sound, often described as a musical note or a faint voice. The Greeks and Romans who visited the site became convinced it was Memnon, the mythical Ethiopian king, greeting his mother, the dawn goddess Eos. This singing was likely caused by moisture trapped within the cracked stone expanding rapidly in the morning heat, but for the ancients it was an undeniable miracle. Pilgrims flocked from across the empire, leaving inscriptions on the statue's legs to commemorate the day they heard the divine voice, a testament to the profound need to believe in a god that could communicate directly through its own image. The psychological effect on a supplicant experiencing this was the ultimate source of the practice's power. To hear a 50-foot-tall statue of Zeus or Ammon speak your name was to have your entire reality recalibrated. The divine was no longer an abstract concept, it was a presence in the room, aware of you personally. This experience created an unbreakable bond of faith and loyalty. It transformed the temple from a place of distant worship into a direct portal for communication. The authority of the priests who facilitated this communication became absolute, as they were the gatekeepers to this incredible phenomenon. A prophecy delivered by a speaking statue carried a weight that no human seer could ever match. It was a self-reinforcing cycle of belief. The more spectacular the manifestation, the stronger the faith. The stronger the faith, the more powerful the priests became, and the more powerful the priests, the more resources they had to create ever more convincing manifestations. This hidden practice, therefore, was not just about delivering prophecies, it was about manufacturing certainty using every tool available, from advanced acoustics to deep understanding of human psychology, to make the divine undeniably, thrillingly real. Moving from the engineered spectacle of speaking statues, we find ourselves drawn to a practice that finds its power not in grand temples or clever machinery, but in the silent, enduring presence of the earth's own bones. This is lithomancy, the 15th hidden practice, a form of divination that listens to the wisdom held within stones and crystals. In the ancient world, stones were not seen as inert objects. They were believed to be reservoirs of elemental energy, each type vibrating with its own unique frequency and connection to the divine. An oracle practicing lithomancy was essentially a translator, learning the subtle language of these earthly treasures to provide clarity and foresight. The rituals were deeply personal and tactile, turning the simple act of holding and casting stones into a profound conversation with the cosmos. The very first step in this process was the creation of a sacred set, a collection that was often a lifetime in the making. An oracle wouldn't just gather random pebbles from a riverbank, they would seek out specific stones from powerful locations. A piece of obsidian from a volcanic flow, a smooth quartz from a sacred mountain spring, or a blood-red jasper from a desert canyon. Each stone was chosen not only for its type but for its unique shape, color, and even the feeling it evoked in the hand. A dark, heavy hematite might be used for grounding and protection, its weight symbolizing stability. A light, airy piece of amber, warm to the touch, could represent solar energy and joy. A vibrant piece of lapis lazuli, with its celestial blue flecked with gold, was often linked to truth and divine wisdom. Before being used, these stones would be ritually cleansed in running water, smoked with sacred herbs, and charged under the light of the sun or moon, transforming them from simple minerals into consecrated tools of prophecy. The most common method of lithomancy involved the casting of these stones onto a specially prepared surface. This wasn't a haphazard toss, it was a deliberate ritual. The diviner would often use a cloth or a wooden board marked with a circular grid, divided into sections that represented different aspects of life: love, health, wealth, travel, and spiritual matters. Holding the entire set of stones in their hands, the oracle would focus their intention on a specific question, infusing the stones with their query. Then, with a gentle shake and a release, they would cast the stones onto the grid. The interpretation that followed was a complex art of spatial relationships. A stone landing directly in the journey sector clearly spoke of travel, but if a stone representing delay landed on top of it, the message was one of obstacles. A cluster of stones in the relationships area indicated a busy social life, while a single Chinese letter stone in health might point to a need for solitude and recuperation. The diviner read the story not from a single stone, but from the entire constellation they formed upon the cloth, a snapshot of cosmic forces frozen in a moment of chance. Another widespread technique was the drawing of stones from a ritual bag. This method was particularly popular for providing clear, direct answers to yes or no questions, or for identifying a primary influence in a person's life. The seeker, after concentrating on their dilemma, would reach into a dark, often beautifully embroidered bag and draw out a single stone without looking. The stone selected was believed to be magnetically drawn to them by the energy of their own situation. Drawing a clear quartz crystal, a stone of amplification and clarity, was a strong affirmative, a sign to move forward with confidence. Pulling a dark, mottled agate, however, might be a warning to slow down and reconsider, as it symbolized hidden challenges and the need for caution. For more complex inquiries, 3 stones might be drawn to represent the past, present, and future influences on a situation, creating a miniature timeline of cause and effect written in mineral. This belief in the prophetic power of stones finds one of its most significant and authoritative expressions in the ancient world within the tradition of the Jewish high priest. The breastplate of judgment, described in the book of Exodus, was a spectacular ceremonial garment embedded with 12 different precious stones, each representing one of the tribes of Israel. But this was far more than a symbol of unity. It was a powerful divinatory tool. Attached to the breastplate were the Urim and Thummim, whose exact nature remains one of the great mysteries of biblical scholarship. Many historians and theologians believe they were a set of 2 distinct stones or flat objects, perhaps one light and one dark, kept in a pouch within the breastplate itself. When a critical question of national importance arose, should we go to war, has God accepted this offering? The high priest would perform a ritual. He would stand before the tabernacle, his heart aligned with the stones representing the people, and reach into the breastplate to draw out either the Urim or the Thummim. The selection provided a divine verdict. While the precise mechanism is lost, the most prevalent theory is that Urim signified no or a negative outcome, derived from a Hebrew root for curse, while Thummim, from a root meaning perfect or complete, signified yes or a favorable outcome. This practice elevated lithomancy to the highest level of statecraft, showing that the fate of an entire nation could rest on the divinatory pull of a sacred stone from a priestly pouch, a powerful testament to the universal human faith in the messages carried within the earth's enduring crystals. In a fascinating twist that blends the prophetic with the culinary, we encounter the 16th hidden practice, hydromancy, a method of divination that literally delivered its messages baked inside a daily staple. The name itself comes from the Greek word alluron, meaning flower, revealing the heart of this wonderfully tactile ritual. Picture the scene not in a dark, incense-filled chamber, but in the warm, familiar surroundings of a temple kitchen. Instead of a priestess in a trance, you might find a baker, their hands dusted with flour, carefully preparing a batch of dough. But this was no ordinary baking. This was the creation of edible oracles, a process that transformed simple flour and water into vessels of fate, making the act of breaking bread a moment of divine revelation. The procedure was as methodical as it was creative. First, the priests or oracle attendants would write a series of short prophecies, maxims, or answers to common questions on small slips of papyrus or thin pieces of lead. These messages could range from the profoundly simple, like "the gods favor your journey," to the mysteriously poetic, such as "a swift horse brings news from afar." Each slip contained a complete, self-contained piece of guidance. Then the dough was prepared, often from barley meal, a grain sacred to Demeter, the goddess of the harvest. As the dough was mixed and kneaded, prayers and invocations were recited over it, consecrating the coming loaves. The written slips were then individually folded and sealed inside small, identical balls of this dough. These balls were then baked, either as small, hard biscuits or as softer bread rolls, their secret cargo safely hidden within the crust. The final, crucial step was the randomization. All the baked goods were placed together in a basket or on a platter, their identical appearance ensuring that no one, not even the priest distributing them, could know which message a supplicant was about to receive. For the person seeking guidance, the experience was one of pure, suspenseful chants. You would approach the altar, make a small offering, and then be invited to select one biscuit from the many available. Your choice was completely random, a literal lottery of fate. You would then break open the hard shell of the dough to retrieve the slip of paper hidden inside. The moment of unrolling that tiny scroll and reading the words was the climax of the ritual, a personal, tangible message from the gods, chosen by your own hand from a multitude of possibilities. This process ingeniously removed any potential for human bias or manipulation. The priest hadn't handed you a specific message. The god, through the chaotic and impartial mechanism of chance, had guided your hand to the prophecy meant for you. It was a powerful way to make the divine will feel immediate and personal, a direct dispatch from the heavens discovered in the simple, satisfying act of breaking bread. The philosophy behind hydromancy is deeply connected to the ancient belief in a universe governed by a divine order, where even apparent randomness was merely a pattern too complex for humans to perceive. By surrendering the choice to chance, the supplicant was, in effect, surrendering their will to the cosmos, allowing a higher power to dictate the answer. This resonated with the Greek concept of moira, or fate, and the idea that the threads of our lives are woven in ways we cannot always see. Hydromancy provided a tiny, edible window into that grand tapestry. The practice also shares a delightful and direct lineage with a modern tradition that many of us know and love, the fortune cookie. While the exact historical path is debated, the core concept is undeniably the same: a baked good containing a hidden slip of paper with a message about one's future. This connection across millennia shows how a compelling idea can endure, adapting its form but retaining its essential magic. The ancient Greek seeking answers about a sea voyage, and the modern diner hoping for a lucky number, are participating in the same fundamental human ritual, using food as a medium to bridge the gap between the uncertain present and the mysterious future. While we might associate profound spiritual experiences with the inhalation of intoxicating fumes or the deep meditation of scrying, one of the most fundamental and demanding practices in an oracle's arsenal was a deliberate and controlled confrontation with a basic human need, the need for food. This 17th hidden practice, the ritual of sacred fasting, was not about weight loss or physical health. It was a systematic process of purification and sensory deprivation designed to dismantle the ordinary conscious mind and forge a more receptive vessel for the divine. Before a major prophecy at a place like Delphi or a night of sacred incubation at Epidaurus, an oracle would undergo a period of rigorous fasting, sometimes lasting for 3 days or more. This wasn't a simple avoidance of a single meal. It was a complete restructuring of their physical and mental state, a calculated withdrawal from the material world to make room for the spiritual one. The rules governing these fasts were incredibly specific and deeply symbolic. The primary goal was to avoid any food considered to be overly grounding or connected to the mundane world of physical desires. This almost always meant a strict prohibition on all meat and animal products. The logic was clear: consuming the flesh of another living creature would tie the oracle's spirit to the cycle of death and violence, polluting their connection to the pure, celestial realm of the gods. Beans were another almost universally forbidden food. The ancient Greek philosopher and mystic Pythagoras and his followers famously forbade the eating of beans, believing they contained the souls of the dead, and this taboo extended to many oracle traditions. Beyond these major prohibitions, oracles often avoided grains like barley and wheat, especially fermented grains used in beer or wine. Alcohol was completely forbidden, as its intoxicating effects were seen as a false, chaotic form of ecstasy that would only cloud the mind rather than clarify it. So, what was an oracle permitted to consume? The diet was often limited to the most ethereal and simple of substances: sips of water from a sacred spring, small amounts of honey for its pure, sun-derived sweetness, and perhaps leaves from specific aromatic plants like laurel or mint, not as a meal but as a ritual offering to cleanse the palate and the spirit. This minimalist regimen was a form of spiritual hygiene, stripping away the physical noise of digestion and heavy sustenance. The physiological effects of this controlled starvation were profound and, from the ancient perspective, absolutely essential for achieving a prophetic state. Modern science helps us understand exactly what was happening inside the oracle's body and brain. After about 24 to 48 hours without food, the body depletes its glycogen stores and enters a state of ketosis, beginning to burn its own fat for fuel. This metabolic shift is often accompanied by mental clarity and a decrease in the sensation of hunger, but it can also lead to lightheadedness, heightened sensory perception, and a feeling of detachment from the physical self. As the fast continues, the body's production of stress hormones like cortisol can increase, leading to a state of hyper-alertness. Combine this with dehydration from a water-only diet, and the stage is perfectly set for altered states of consciousness. The oracle, weakened physically and mentally fatigued, would find their normal, analytical thought processes beginning to break down. The boundary between the internal world of thought and the external world of perception would become thin and porous. In this vulnerable, suggestible state, the flicker of a temple lamp could be perceived as a divine flash of light, and the whisper of the wind through a column could transform into the clear voice of a god. The visions and insights that arose were not mere hallucinations in the modern pathological sense. They were, for the practitioners, the true voice of the divine, finally able to be heard once the incessant chatter of the physical body had been silenced through disciplined abstinence. After confronting the physical deprivation of the sacred fast, the oracle would then begin to fill the newly created emptiness not with food, but with sound, channeling the divine through the 18th hidden practice, the chanting of mantras and voces magicae. If fasting was about clearing the temple of the self, then chanting was the act of inviting the deity to take up residence, using the sheer vibrational power of the human voice to alter reality and bridge the chasm between the earthly and the celestial. This was not about the meaning of words in any conventional sense. It was about their raw, sonic architecture, their ability to resonate within the body of the practitioner and ripple outwards to touch the very fabric of the cosmos. The voice became a magical instrument, and the ritual was a symphony composed for an audience of one, the god or goddess being invoked. The most potent tools in this sonic arsenal were the voces magicae, the magical voices or words of power. These were not phrases from any known human language, but strings of mystical, often baffling syllables believed to be the true, secret names of divine beings or the fundamental sounds of creation itself. To pronounce them correctly was to grasp the reins of cosmic power. We find these powerful formulas preserved in remarkable documents like the Greek magical papyri, a collection of spell books and ritual manuals from Greco-Roman Egypt. Opening these texts is like stepping into the workshop of an ancient sorcerer. You encounter breathtakingly long, rhythmic chains of vowels like a e e I I o o o u u u u u o o o I e a, which were chanted to align the practitioner's breath with the 7 classical planets. Elsewhere, you find powerful cryptic names like acromachomere and abrasax, each consonant and vowel believed to be a key that could unlock a specific spiritual force or compel a deity to appear. The sheer strangeness of these words was part of their power. By moving beyond ordinary language, the chanter was moving beyond ordinary consciousness, bypassing the logical mind to communicate directly with the divine on its own terms. The technique of delivering these chants was as crucial as the sounds themselves. This was not a quiet, internal meditation. It was a full-body, often physically demanding performance. Oracles were instructed to chant these voces magicae in a specific, prescribed manner. Some spells in the papyri demand the words be spoken in a single breath, forcing the practitioner to the edge of dizziness and hyperventilation, a physiological trigger for an altered state. Others specify the tone, to bark the words like a dog to invoke Hecate, or to whisper them gently to attract a benevolent spirit. The repetition was relentless. A single mantra might be repeated hundreds, even thousands of times, the sound becoming a monotonous drone that filled the mind and crowded out all other thought. This intense, focused repetition is a psychological tool we now understand deeply. It effectively functions as a form of auditory sensory deprivation, boring the conscious mind into submission so that deeper, more intuitive layers of awareness can rise to the surface. The sound waves vibrating in the chest and skull became a physical massage for the soul, shaking loose the practitioner's mundane identity and making room for the influx of the divine. This ancient understanding of sound as a transformative technology finds a powerful and direct parallel in the mantras used across various modern meditation and spiritual traditions. The concept is essentially identical. In transcendental meditation, for instance, a practitioner is given a personal, meaningless sound, a mantra to repeat silently. The meaning is irrelevant, the effect is everything. The repetition of the sound provides a single point of focus that allows the meditator to settle into quieter, more profound levels of consciousness. In Tibetan Buddhism, the chanting of Om Mani Padme Hum is not just a prayer but a vibrational tool to cultivate compassion and wisdom, with each syllable believed to purify a different negative emotion. The rhythmic chanting in a Kundalini yoga class or the ecstatic repetitions in Sufi Hika ceremonies all serve the same fundamental purpose as the voces magicae of the ancient world: to use the self-created sound of the human voice as a vehicle to travel inward, to transcend the ego, and to experience a state of being that feels connected to something much larger than the self. The ancient oracle seeking a vision of Apollo and the modern meditator seeking inner peace are, in a very real sense, using the same technology, the sacred engine of repetitive sound, to navigate the vast and mysterious landscape of human consciousness. Now we move from the vibrational power of sacred chanting to a practice that is as earthy and tangible as it gets, finding cosmic meaning in the very anatomy of a sacrificed animal. This 19th hidden practice is spatulamancy, also known as scapulomancy, the art of divining the future by reading the cracks and marks on the shoulder blades of animals. Imagine the scene after a community feast. The sheep has been roasted and eaten, the hide has been tanned for leather, but one part of the animal remains, treated not as waste but with a kind of reverent curiosity, the large, flat shoulder blade or scapula. This bone was believed to be a direct conduit to the spirit world, a blank slate upon which the gods would inscribe their answers for those who knew how to ask the right questions and read the resulting signs. The ritual began with meticulous preparation. The chosen bone, most often from a sheep or goat due to their widespread domestication, had to be carefully stripped of all flesh and cartilage. This was usually done by boiling it, or sometimes by simply leaving it outside for insects to clean naturally. The goal was a perfectly clean, dry, and unblemished surface, a pristine canvas awaiting the divine artist's hand. Once cleaned, the bone was often polished with stones or sand to make its surface even smoother and more receptive. In some traditions, this clean slate was enough, and the diviner would then pose a specific question to the spirits, perhaps about the outcome of a hunt, the health of the tribe, or the coming weather. and wait for natural cracks or discolorations to appear over time. But in the most widespread and dramatic form of the ritual, the oracle would actively provoke a response from the other side through the application of extreme heat. This is where the process becomes truly fascinating. The diviner would take the prepared scapula and, using tongs or a forked stick, hold it over a hot fire or press a specially heated brand or poker against a specific point on the bone. The intense, dry heat would cause the organic material within the bone to expand and contract at different rates, creating immense internal stress. This stress would then release in a sudden, sharp crack, and a network of fine lines would spread across the bone's surface. To an untrained eye, these were just random fractures, but to the skilled spatulamancer, they were a complex and meaningful text. The diviner would then carefully study the pattern, holding the bone up to the firelight to see the web of cracks illuminated from behind. They were looking at the length, direction, and depth of the main cracks. A long, clean crack running the length of the bone might be interpreted as a yes or a clear path forward. A series of short, jagged lines intersecting a main crack could signify obstacles or conflict. The point of origin of the primary crack was also critical. A fracture starting near the top of the bone might relate to celestial matters or leaders, while one from the bottom could concern the earth, harvests, or the common people. What makes this practice so compelling is that it emerged independently with striking similarity in two vastly different and geographically separate cultures, ancient China and among the Celtic tribes of Europe. In China, scapulamancy was a cornerstone of the Shang dynasty, one of the earliest recorded Chinese dynasties over 3,000 years ago. The Shang kings used it as the primary method of state divination, consulting the oracle bones on matters ranging from military campaigns and royal childbirth to the timing of rituals and the wishes of the royal ancestors. The ritual was incredibly formal. A question would be carved directly into the cleaned scapula of an ox or the plastron of a turtle. Then, a hot bronze rod was applied to the bone, creating the telltale T-shaped cracks. The king or his diviner would interpret the pattern, and the entire event, the question, the date, and sometimes even the outcome, would be recorded in the bone itself. The discovery of these oracle bones in the late 19th century was a watershed moment for archaeology, providing the first direct physical evidence of the Shang dynasty and transforming our understanding of early Chinese civilization. It shows us that this was not a folk superstition, but a sophisticated bureaucratic tool for governing a vast kingdom. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Celtic druids and seers were engaging in a remarkably parallel practice. Classical authors like the Roman geographer Strabo wrote about the Celts using the shoulder blades of sheep for prophecy. In the Celtic tradition, the ritual was often tied to the community and its relationship with the local land spirits. Before choosing a new chieftain, embarking on a cattle raid, or selecting a site for a new settlement, the druid would perform the scorching ritual. The cracks were read as a direct message from the otherworld, confirming or denying the tribe's plans. A favorable reading would fill the people with confidence, while an unfavorable one could lead to the abandonment of a long-planned venture. The existence of this same specific practice in two unconnected cultures speaks to a universal human impulse. It represents a profound belief in a connected universe where the macrocosm of fate and the divine will could be made visible in the microcosm of a single burned bone. It was a way of turning the abstract into the concrete, of holding the mysterious future in your hands and tracing its lines with your fingertips, finding reassurance and guidance in the stark, physical evidence of the crack and the char. From the stark, physical reality of reading cracked bones, we now venture into one of the most controversial and frequently sensationalized practices in the entire history of ancient spirituality. This is the 20th hidden practice, often referred to as sacred prostitution, a ritual so deeply misunderstood that it requires us to set aside our modern judgments and peer into a world with a completely different view of sexuality, divinity, and the very nature of offering. The popular image, fueled by tales from Greek historians like Herodotus, is of vast temples where anonymous sexual acts were performed with priests and priestesses as a matter of common religious duty. However, the historical truth is far more nuanced, subtle, and spiritually significant. At its core, this was not about commercial sex work in any modern sense. It was a profound act of imitative magic, a physical prayer intended to harness and channel the most potent creative force in the universe, the power of life itself, to ensure the fertility of the land, the abundance of the people, and the direct favor of the gods. To understand this, we must first journey to the heart of Mesopotamian civilization, to the ziggurat temples dedicated to the goddess Ishtar, known to the Sumerians as Inanna. Ishtar was a deity of staggering complexity. She was the goddess of love and sexual desire, but also of war, political power, and the planet Venus. Her worship involved the celebration of life in all its passionate, raw, and generative fury. Within this theological framework, the act of sex was not seen as sinful or shameful. It was a sacred echo of the primordial act of creation. It was believed that the human engagement in sexual union could, through a kind of spiritual resonance, stimulate the gods to perform their own divine duties, to cause the rains to fall, the crops to grow, and the womb of both the earth and its women to be fruitful. The women associated with these temples, known as Intu, Nadatu, or Kadishtu, were not common prostitutes. They were often women of high status, sometimes from wealthy families who were dedicated to the goddess's service. Their role was to enact the sacred marriage rite, or hieros gomos, a ritual where they would embody the goddess herself and unite, either symbolically or physically, with a king or a high priest who represented the god Dumuzi. This annual ritual was not a private affair. It was a public, state-sponsored ceremony intended to guarantee the kingdom's prosperity for the coming year. The sexual act in this specific, highly ritualized context was a form of national security, a magical operation performed for the benefit of all. The great challenge in uncovering the reality of this practice lies in the nature of our sources. The most famous account comes from the Greek historian Herodotus, who wrote about Babylon in the 5th century BCE. He described a law that supposedly compelled every woman in the land, at least once in her life, to travel to the temple of Ishtar, sit in the sacred precinct, and have intercourse with a stranger, to whom she would give a small coin as an offering to the goddess. While this makes for a dramatic story, most modern scholars view Herodotus's account with deep skepticism. He was an outsider looking in, often relaying sensational tales he heard from guides. There is no corroborating evidence from Babylonian cuneiform tablets that such a universal law ever existed. It is far more likely that he misinterpreted or exaggerated a more limited, symbolic rite. The historical evidence points instead to a class of women who were permanently attached to the temple. These women could own property, conduct business, and enjoyed a degree of independence unusual for the time. Their sexual service was likely not a random, wholesale activity, but a specific ritual function for specific clients, perhaps as a form of divination receiving visions or dreams after the act, or as a final, potent fertility rite for men whose wives had not borne children. The exchange of money was not a payment for services. It was a sacred votive offering, a financial sacrifice given to the temple treasury, much like someone today might drop a coin into a collection box after lighting a candle in a church. This concept of sexuality as a sacred offering extended beyond Mesopotamia. In the Greco-Roman world, we find a similar, though distinct, practice in the worship of Aphrodite in Corinth. The city was famous for its temple of Aphrodite on the Acrocorinth, which, according to the geographer Strabo, was served by 1,000 temple servants he called hieroduloi, or sacred slaves. These women were said to engage in sexual rites as part of their devotion, and Corinth's prosperity was partly attributed to this practice, which attracted sailors and merchants from across the Mediterranean. Yet even here, the line between sacred rite and commercial enterprise was likely blurry. A sailor offering his earnings to Aphrodite in her temple after a successful voyage might have seen his encounter with a hierodoulos not as a visit to a brothel, but as a celebratory act of thanksgiving to the goddess of love and beauty, a way of physically expressing his gratitude and ensuring her continued favor on his next journey. The act for him was imbued with religious significance, a transaction of faith rather than a simple commercial one. The hidden power of this practice, therefore, lay in its complete reframing of a fundamental human experience. In a world where survival depended on the capricious cycles of nature, the people of the ancient Near East and Mediterranean developed a spirituality that sought to actively participate in and influence those cycles. They used the most powerful creative energy available to them, their own bodies, in a deliberate, ritualized effort to commune with the divine, to plead for life, and to play their part in the eternal, cosmic dance of creation that sustained their world. While the mesmerizing dance of a sacred fire offered its own immediate prophecies, the wisdom of the flames didn't necessarily end when the last ember faded into darkness. This brings us to the 21st hidden practice, tephromancy, the remarkably subtle art of divination by ashes. Imagine the scene after a grand ritual. The offerings have been consumed, the prayers have been chanted, and the vibrant, roaring fire has collapsed into a bed of gray and white powder, still warm to the touch. For a practitioner of tephromancy, this was not the end of the ceremony, but the beginning of a new and more nuanced phase of interpretation. Where pyromancy read the dynamic, living language of the flame, tephromancy interpreted the permanent record it left behind, a divine manuscript inscribed in fragile, powdery script. The ritual itself was a study in delicate precision. Once the fire had cooled sufficiently, the oracle would carefully gather a portion of the ash, ensuring it came from a fire that had been lit with a sacred purpose. This was not just any ash, it was the condensed essence of a specific offering, perhaps the remains of a sacrificial animal, a bundle of ritually significant herbs, or the wood of a tree sacred to a particular deity. The oracle would then take this consecrated ash and, holding it in their cupped hands, scatter it evenly across a flat, dark surface. This surface was crucial for creating contrast. It might be a slate tablet, a sheet of polished bronze, or a piece of dark cloth stretched taut. The fine particles would drift down, settling into a random, textured layer. The oracle wouldn't manipulate the ash to form shapes. The act of scattering was the question, and the resulting pattern was the answer. They would then kneel, their eyes scanning this miniature landscape of gray, searching for the symbols and forms that the divine intelligence had arranged from the chaos. Interpreting these ash-born symbols required a unique kind of vision, one that combined the pattern recognition of a geomancer with the symbolic knowledge of a dream interpreter. The oracle wasn't just looking for random pictures, they were deciphering a complex code based on traditional forms. The appearance of a clear, ring-like circle in the ash might signify completion, a cycle coming to a close, or the protective boundaries of a community. A series of straight, intersecting lines could be read as roads or paths, indicating a journey, a choice, or an upcoming conflict between opposing forces. The resemblance of an animal was always particularly potent. The fleeting shape of a bird might foretell a message arriving soon, while the form of a serpent could signal a hidden enemy or a necessary period of transformation and healing. The thickness of the ash in certain areas also mattered. A deep, dark patch might indicate an area of concentrated energy or a looming obstacle, while a thin, almost translucent area could suggest a lack or a vulnerability. This practice demanded immense patience and a quiet mind, as the symbols were often faint, transient, and open to multiple layers of meaning depending on their context and placement on the diviner's surface. One of the most compelling aspects of tephromancy was its portability and its role as a reflective tool. unlike the grand, public spectacle of reading a sacrificial liver or the fixed location of a dream incubation chamber, this was a method that could be performed almost anywhere and often after the main event was over. A military commander on campaign could have his seer examine the ashes from the previous night's campfire to discern the mood of the gods regarding the day's planned maneuvers. A family could consult the hearth ashes the morning after a private offering to ask for guidance on a domestic matter. This made divine insight accessible in a deeply personal and immediate way. Furthermore, hydromancy served as a form of ritual confirmation or postscript. The initial ecstatic prophecies delivered in the heat of the moment could be powerful but also confusing. By reading the ashes the next day, the priests could seek clarification. The stable, fixed patterns in the ash provided a second opinion, a calmer, more meditative confirmation of the frantic messages shouted from the heart of the fire. It was a way of saying, now that the passion has settled, let us look at what remains and see the truth written in the calm aftermath. This practice demonstrates the incredible resourcefulness of ancient spirituality, finding profound meaning not only in the dramatic and the volatile, but also in the quiet, residual evidence of the sacred, discovering the whispers of the gods in the very dust of their consumption. But for all the careful rituals involving fire, bones, and sacred chanting, sometimes the most direct way to test the favor of the gods was to simply take something. This brings us to the 22nd hidden practice, an audacious and deeply personal form of divination known as hydromancy, or the ritual of symbolic theft. Imagine standing at a crossroads, both literally and metaphorically. You have a burning question, perhaps about the wisdom of a marriage proposal or the success of a business venture, and you need an unambiguous sign. Instead of waiting for a vision or a dream, you would actively create a situation where the gods themselves would be forced to show their hand, intervening in the mundane world to deliver a clear yes or no through the simple, high-stakes act of a petty crime. The ritual itself was disarmingly straightforward, yet the psychological tension it created was immense. A person, or sometimes an oracle acting on their behalf, would identify a small, specific object to serve as the focal point for the divination. This wasn't about acquiring something of material value. In fact, the objects were often virtually worthless in and of themselves. A common household key, a single nail from a fence post, a specific herb from a neighbor's garden, or a pebble from a public fountain were all typical choices. The symbolic nature of the item was crucial. A key, for instance, might be stolen to answer a question about an opportunity, unlocking, while taking a nail could relate to the stability of a home or relationship. After concentrating on their question, the supplicant would then attempt to steal the chosen object, fully aware that they were being observed by both the community and, more importantly, the divine. The entire prophecy hinged on the immediate outcome of this attempt. If the theft was accomplished smoothly and without any interference or notice, it was interpreted as a powerful affirmative. The gods had effectively turned a blind eye, blessing the action and, by extension, the venture it symbolized. The path was clear. However, if the person was caught, challenged, or even just experienced a sudden mishap like tripping or dropping the object, the omen was decisively negative. The gods had actively intervened to create an obstacle, signaling their disapproval and warning against moving forward. This practice found a particularly strong foothold in the folk traditions of the British Isles and Eastern Europe, where it often blurred the lines between divination and youthful courtship rituals. In some Scottish and Irish villages, a young woman unsure of a suitor's intentions might perform a hydromancy ritual on a significant date, like Halloween or May Eve, nights when the veil between worlds was thin. She might sneak into the suitor's family garden and attempt to steal a specific flower or a ribbon from their property. If she returned home unchallenged, it was seen as a sign that the union was favored and would proceed happily. But if a dog barked, a family member spotted her, or she simply felt a strong sense of foreboding and aborted the attempt, it was taken as a clear warning to reconsider the match. The risk of social embarrassment was part of the test. The gods were using the fabric of the community itself as their instrument of communication. The underlying philosophy of cladomancy reveals a fascinating aspect of ancient spirituality, the belief in a deeply interactive universe. This wasn't about passively receiving a sign through a random event like the flight of a bird. This was about proactively demanding a sign by creating a scenario that forced a divine response. It placed the power and the responsibility squarely in the hands of the seeker. By committing a transgressive act, even a minor one, the individual was essentially saying to the gods, "My need for an answer is so great that I am willing to risk my reputation and my standing. Now show me your will through the consequence of my action." It transformed divination from a spectator sport into a participatory drama, where the seeker was both the actor and the audience, and the gods were the directors who could halt the play at any moment with a single, unambiguous stage direction. This practice acknowledged that the divine was not distant and aloof, but intimately involved in the minute-by-minute unfolding of human life, willing to manipulate chance and circumstance to provide guidance to those brave or desperate enough to ask for it in such a direct and tangible way. After deliberately provoking a divine response through the symbolic theft of cladomancy, we find another practice that also finds profound meaning in the unplanned events of daily life, but this one requires no action at all, only a heightened state of listening. This is the 23rd hidden practice, cladomancy, the art of interpreting chants utterances. Imagine yourself as an ancient Greek or Roman, tormented by a question you simply cannot answer on your own. Instead of retreating to a silent temple, you would walk directly into the heart of the community, a bustling marketplace, a crowded tavern, or a busy street corner. There you would hold your question in your mind and then simply listen. The very first phrase you overheard from a conversation between strangers, or perhaps the first distinct line from a public crier or a passing poet, was believed to be a direct, personalized message from the gods, a prophecy delivered through the unwitting mouths of ordinary people going about their day. The ritual of seeking out these utterances was deceptively simple, yet it required immense mental focus and a specific mindset. A supplicant would first purify themselves, not necessarily with an elaborate bath, but by clearing their mind of preconceptions and personal desires. They had to become a perfect receptor, a hollow vessel waiting to be filled by the divine whisper carried on the winds of chance. Then they would formulate their question with precision. It couldn't be vague, it had to be a clear, focused inquiry such as, "Should I invest in the merchant ship sailing to Cyprus next week?" Or, "Is my son's illness a cause for grave concern?" Holding this question firmly in their thoughts, they would then position themselves in a place of maximum human activity, often at a specific time considered auspicious like dawn or dusk. The key was to remain perfectly passive. They were not to speak to anyone or draw attention to themselves. Their only role was to eavesdrop intentionally, waiting for the universe to deliver its verdict through the cacophony of public life. The moment the first intelligible string of words reached their ears, the ritual was complete. The omen had been given, but hearing the phrase was only the beginning. The real, hidden work of cladomancy was the intensely complex act of interpretation. The words overheard were almost never a literal, straightforward answer. They were a symbolic puzzle, a riddle that needed to be deciphered and applied allegorically to the supplicant's specific situation. This required a deep understanding of wordplay, cultural context, and mythological allegory. For instance, if a man asked about a potential marriage and the first words he heard were, "The north wind is fierce today," he and his interpreter would have to unpack the symbolic meaning. The north wind, or boreas, was often associated with harshness and coldness. This might not mean the marriage would be bad, but rather that the initial period would be difficult and require resilience. Conversely, if he heard a fishmonger shout, "The catch is plentiful and fresh," it could be interpreted as a wonderfully positive omen for fertility and abundance in the marital union. This practice reveals a breathtakingly democratic view of the divine. It proposed that the gods did not need grand temples or expensive sacrifices to communicate. They could use the most humble and ubiquitous of instruments, human speech itself. The entire world became a temple, and every passerby a potential, if unknowing, prophet. This belief system saw the fabric of everyday reality as being woven through with divine intention. What a secular mind would dismiss as mere coincidence was, to the cledonomancer, a clear thread of purpose pulled from the tapestry of chants. It was a way of sanctifying the mundane, of finding order and meaning in the apparent chaos of a crowded street, and of assuring the individual that their personal dilemmas were significant enough to warrant a cosmic response, delivered free of charge by the first person who happened to speak within earshot. This practice placed the responsibility for finding meaning on the seeker, training them to see their life and their problems as part of a larger, interconnected story that the gods were constantly narrating through the lives of everyone around them. While the chanting of mantras could carry the mind to an altered state through sound, other oracles sought to open the doors of perception through a far more direct and biochemical route, by applying or ingesting powerful psychotropic substances derived from the plant world. This 24th hidden practice involves the creation and ritual use of narcotic ointments and visionary potions. We are not talking about recreational drugs. This was a sacred and dangerous form of pharmacology, a deliberate harnessing of nature's most potent chemistry to achieve a temporary state of divine madness. The oracles who used these substances were not merely intoxicated. They were engaging in a calculated spiritual experiment, using plants like henbane, mandrake, and belladonna as their keys to unlock realms of consciousness normally barred to the waking mind. The first and most crucial step in this perilous process was the gathering of the sacred plants themselves, an act surrounded by ritual and superstition. These were not common herbs picked from a garden. They were believed to be gifts from the gods, but gifts with a vengeful spirit that had to be appeased. Mandrake, with its forked root often resembling a human form, was considered one of the most powerful and dangerous. Ancient sources, like the Greek physician Dioscorides, describe an elaborate harvesting ritual. The gatherer could not touch the plant with their bare hands, fearing it would scream a curse upon being uprooted. Instead, they would draw 3 magic circles around the plant with a sword, often at midnight. They would then tie a dog to the base of the plant and retreat, offering the dog a piece of meat just out of its reach. As the dog lunged for the meat, it would pull the mandrake from the ground, and its cry would supposedly absorb the plant's lethal scream, killing the animal but leaving the root safe for the gatherer to collect. This macabre procedure underscores the deep respect and fear these plants inspired. They were seen as semi-sentient allies in the quest for knowledge, but allies that demanded a terrible price for their service. Once the raw materials were secured, the meticulous work of preparation began, a process that differentiated a sacred entheogen from a deadly poison. The oracle or shamanic priestess, often a woman with knowledge passed down through generations, would work in a secluded space. For topical ointments, the fat of a recently sacrificed animal, like a goat or a pig, would be rendered and used as a base. The psychoactive plants, the crushed seeds of henbane, the berries of belladonna, or the shredded root of mandrake would be gently heated in this fat for hours, allowing the fat-soluble alkaloids like scopolamine and atropine to infuse the mixture. The resulting salve was a thick, greasy substance, often stored in a special jar made of dark glass or ceramic to protect it from light. For potions, the process was different. The plant matter might be steeped in wine or water, but great care had to be taken with dosage, as ingestion was far more dangerous than topical application. Sometimes, to mitigate the risk, the plants were added to a strong, fermented beer, which itself had mild psychoactive properties, creating a layered and complex chemical cocktail designed to disassemble ordinary consciousness piece by piece. The method of application was as critical as the preparation, rubbing the ointment onto the skin, particularly on areas with thin skin and high blood vessel density like the inner wrists, the temples, the neck, or even the labia and vaginal walls, allowed the potent alkaloids to be absorbed directly into the bloodstream, bypassing the digestive system. This transdermal method provided a slower, more controlled onset of effects compared to drinking a potion. The user would begin to feel the world shift around them. Their mouth would become dry, their pupils would dilate dramatically into wide, black circles, the source of Belladonna's name, which means beautiful lady, as it was also used cosmetically to create this striking effect. Their heart rate would increase and a profound sense of disorientation and weightlessness would set in. The boundary between their body and the room would blur and the world would take on a dreamlike, fluid quality. This was the prelude to the vision. In this highly suggestible and dissociated state, the chants, the flickering lamplight, and the scent of incense in the ritual chamber would become the raw materials from which the subconscious mind would construct powerful, immersive hallucinations, conversations with animal-headed gods, flights over mythical landscapes, or terrifying journeys into the underworld. The risks involved in this practice cannot be overstated. These plants are, to this day, classified as deadly nightshades. The line between a visionary dose and a lethal one was terrifyingly thin. The alkaloids are powerful deliriants. A slight miscalculation in potency could tip the user from a sacred trance into a state of violent, uncontrollable psychosis, permanent brain damage, or fatal cardiac arrest. There is compelling historical and archaeological speculation, notably from figures like Karl Ruck, a classical scholar, that the mysterious Kykeon drink consumed during the Eleusinian Mysteries, the most secretive and revered religious rites of ancient Greece, contained a psychoactive component, possibly a ergot-infused barley drink, which would have produced visions similar to those of LSD. The initiates swore a vow of secrecy on pain of death, and the true nature of the Eleusinian vision has never been revealed, but the profound, life-changing impact reported by those who participated, from emperors to slaves, suggests an experience of staggering power, likely facilitated by a carefully calibrated sacred poison. This practice represents the absolute extreme of the oracle's quest, a willing dance on the knife's edge between transcendence and death, all for a chance to see beyond the veil of ordinary reality and taste the knowledge that the gods reserved for those brave enough or desperate enough to risk everything for a glimpse. From the biochemical intensity of sacred ointments, we now turn to a practice that achieved a similar state of altered consciousness, not through substances, but through sheer, disorienting physical exertion. This is gyromancy, the 25th hidden practice, a word derived from the Greek for circle and prophecy. Imagine a ritual where the key to unlocking the divine wasn't a whispered chant or a hallucinogenic brew, but the simple, overwhelming act of spinning until the world dissolved into a blur. This was divination by dizziness, a method that sought to violently shake the seeker free from the prison of their own rational mind, forcing a gateway open for inspiration to flood in. The oracle here was not a passive recipient of a vision. They were an active participant in their own temporary unmaking, using their body as a tool to induce a trance. The ritual itself was stark in its simplicity, yet brutal in its execution. A circle would be drawn on the ground, often marked with letters of the alphabet, symbols of the zodiac, or words representing potential outcomes. In some traditions, the circle was drawn around a sacred stone or a standing pillar. The seeker, after a period of purification and focused meditation on their question, would step into the center of this designated space. Then they would begin to walk, not a leisurely stroll but a purposeful, accelerating pace, tracing the circumference of the circle with unwavering dedication. The instruction was to keep walking faster and faster, with their gaze fixed on a central point or the horizon, until the body could no longer maintain its balance. The goal was a complete and total surrender to vertigo. The seeker would walk until their legs gave way, until the centrifugal force pulled them down and they collapsed in a heap onto the ground. It was at this precise moment of physical collapse that the divination truly began. The practitioners of gyromancy believed that the conscious, critical mind, the part that doubts, analyzes, and imposes order, had to be disabled to hear the subtle voice of the divine. The intense dizziness and nausea induced by the spinning were not unfortunate side effects, they were the intended mechanism. This violent disorientation served as a hard reset for the nervous system. As the seeker spun, their vestibular system, the body's internal gyroscope located in the inner ear, would become utterly overwhelmed. The conflicting signals from their eyes, muscles, and balance centers would create a sensory storm, short-circuiting normal thought processes. In this vulnerable, suggestible, and profoundly confused state, the mind would reach for any anchor of stability. That anchor, according to the belief, was the symbolic message imprinted by the location and direction of their fall. The interpretation of the fall was a meticulous art. The diviner who had observed the entire process would rush to the side of the collapsed seeker. Their first observation was the direction in which the person had fallen. Did they collapse forward, symbolizing a charge ahead and a positive outcome? Or did they fall backward, suggesting retreat, avoidance, or a need to reconsider the past? A fall to the right side was almost universally considered auspicious, linked to the favorable east and the realm of the conscious mind, while a fall to the left, the side of the heart and the unconscious, could indicate hidden emotions or unpredictable influences. But the most critical data point was the exact spot where the seeker's hand or head had landed within the circle. If the circle was inscribed with letters, the diviner would note which letters were touched. These letters would then be assembled, often in the order they were contacted, to form words or anagrams that constituted the prophecy. If the circle contained symbols, the symbol under the seeker's body held the core of the message. A fall onto a carved image of a ship might mean a journey was imminent, while landing on a sword could warn of conflict. This practice transformed a random physical event, the chaotic collapse of a dizzy person, into a meticulously read text, a story of fate written in the grammar of gravity and imbalance. This hidden technique reveals a profound, ancient understanding of the connection between the physical body and states of consciousness. The practitioners of gyromancy had intuitively discovered what modern neuroscience confirms, that disrupting the body's sense of balance and spatial orientation can directly alter brain function, leading to states that feel transcendent or otherworldly. The spinning used by whirling dervishes in the Sufi tradition to achieve a state of religious ecstasy operates on a similar principle. The constant, rhythmic turning focuses the mind, exhausts the body, and induces a trance that allows for a feeling of union with the divine. Gyromancy, in its more abrupt and violent way, was seeking the same end. It was a shortcut to the unconscious mind, a way to bypass the ego and access the deeper, symbolic layers of the psyche that the ancients attributed to the gods. In a world without modern psychology, they developed a physical technology to hack their own minds, using the dizzying dance of the body to force a conversation with the silent oracle within. But what if you could know the future not through a dramatic vision or a risky ritual, but by simply looking at a calendar? This brings us to our 26th hidden practice, the secret calendars of auspicious days, a system that transformed time itself into a divine map for human action. Far from being merely reactive, waiting for a crisis to force a consultation, the most sophisticated oracles were also proactive strategists. They maintained and consulted intricate, often secret, almanacs that designated every single day of the year as favorable or unfavorable for specific types of activities. This wasn't superstition, it was a complex science of timing, a way of aligning human effort with the invisible tides of cosmic fortune, ensuring that every endeavor, from planting a seed to declaring war, was launched on a wave of celestial approval. The foundation of these calendars was a breathtaking synthesis of observation, tradition, and myth. The primary layer was always astronomical. Oracles and their attendant priests were meticulous astronomers, tracking the cycles of the moon, the sun, and the visible planets with astonishing accuracy. The phase of the moon was paramount. The new moon was almost universally seen as a time for beginnings, for setting intentions and starting new projects, as the moon itself was being reborn. The full moon, bathing the world in its complete light, was ideal for culmination, for celebrations, harvests, and matters requiring full disclosure. But the days just before the new moon, the dark of the moon, were often considered dangerously unlucky, a time when the boundary between worlds was thin and chaotic forces held sway, a period for rest, reflection, and definitely not for launching a ship or signing a contract. Beyond the moon, the positions of the planets were crucial. A day when Jupiter, the planet of expansion and good fortune, was prominent in the night sky or forming a favorable aspect with the moon was a golden opportunity for financial ventures or public speeches. In stark contrast, a day dominated by Mars, the planet of conflict, might be excellent for military drills but disastrous for diplomatic negotiations. But the science of the stars was only the beginning. Woven into this astronomical fabric were the rich threads of mythology. Specific days were designated as lucky or unlucky based on the anniversaries of events in the lives of the gods. In the Roman calendar, for instance, the entire month of February was considered a time of purification and atonement because it was linked to the festival of Parentalia, a period for honoring the dead. To marry during this month was considered highly inadvisable as the energy was focused on the underworld, not on new beginnings. Similarly, a day sacred to a particular deity would be auspicious for activities under their domain. A day dedicated to Mercury, the god of commerce and travel, was the perfect time to open a new shop or embark on a journey. A day sacred to Venus was, of course, ideal for weddings and proposals. This system created a living, breathing connection between the daily life of the people and the epic stories of their gods, turning the passage of time into a continuous reenactment of divine drama. The most famous and influential example of this practice was the Roman fasti, the official state calendar that governed public life for centuries. This was not a simple list of dates. It was a complex legal and religious document, meticulously maintained by the College of Pontiffs, the highest-ranking priests. The fasti divided all days into several categories, but the most critical distinction was between dies fasti and dies nefasti. On a dies fastus, it was legally and religiously permissible for civic business to be conducted. Courts could be in session, assemblies could meet, and contracts could be legally ratified. The gods were, in effect, open for business. On a dies nefastus, however, all such activities were forbidden. These were days dedicated solely to the gods, often marking the anniversaries of temple foundations, military defeats interpreted as divine displeasure, or rituals to appease chthonic deities. For a praetor to hold court on a dies nefastus was not just a procedural error. It was a profound act of impiety that invalidated any judgment made and risked bringing down divine wrath upon the entire state. This system gave the priestly class immense quiet power over the machinery of government, as they held the exclusive knowledge of which days were which. This hidden knowledge extended far beyond Rome. We find similar, equally complex systems in ancient Babylonia, where a vast body of omen texts known as the Enuma Anu Enlil provided a day-by-day guide based on celestial events. An eclipse on a certain day of the month might portend the death of a king, while the appearance of Venus in a specific sector of the sky could predict a bountiful harvest. In China, the practice of selecting auspicious days, known as zeri, remains a vital part of traditional culture, used for everything from scheduling a wedding to opening a business. The Chinese almanac, or Teng Xing, is a direct descendant of these ancient traditions, incorporating elements of astrology, the I Ching, and the balance of yin and yang to advise on the luckiness of each day. The underlying philosophy uniting all these traditions is a powerful one, that time is not a blank, uniform canvas. Instead, it is textured, colored with different qualities of energy. Some days are inherently supportive of certain actions, while others are inherently hostile. The oracle's role was to be a master navigator of this flowing river of time, steering individuals and states away from the treacherous rapids and guiding them toward the smooth, carrying currents, allowing them to harness the hidden momentum of the cosmos itself. Yet another way to find messages in liquid came not from observing its surface, but from introducing a substance that would transform within it. This is the 27th hidden practice, hydromancy, a beautifully simple yet deeply intuitive art of divination using melted wax. Picture a quiet evening in a modest home far from the grandeur of state temples. A family gathers not around a sacrificial altar but around their hearth. A sacred candle, perhaps made with beeswax from a local hive and infused with fragrant herbs, has been burning, its flame a tiny offering to the household gods. Once a sufficient pool of liquid wax has gathered, the ritual begins. The molten wax is carefully poured from a spoon or the candle itself into a bowl of cold water. The moment the hot wax hits the cool liquid, it undergoes a sudden, dramatic transformation, sizzling and hissing as it instantly solidifies into an endless variety of intricate, unpredictable shapes. These fragile, white formations floating on the water's surface were believed to be a direct snapshot of the future, a three-dimensional prophecy cast in a moment of thermal shock. The process of interpreting these waxen forms was an art that combined the visual imagination of a cloud watcher with the symbolic knowledge of a dream reader. The diviner, often the matron of the house or a trusted elder, would lean over the bowl studying the constellation of wax from every angle. They weren't looking for one single shape, but for a narrative that emerged from the entire arrangement. The first thing noted was the overall behavior of the wax. Did it sink immediately, forming lumpy shapes at the bottom? This was often seen as a sign that the matter at hand was grounded, perhaps delayed, or that the answer lay in practical, earthly concerns. If the wax floated on the surface, forming delicate, lacy patterns, it suggested that the situation was still fluid, influenced by higher thoughts, spiritual matters, or public opinion. The most skilled practitioners would then decipher the specific forms. A shape that clearly resembled a heart or a ring might foretell a romance or a marriage proposal. A formation that looked like a ship could indicate an impending journey or news from across the water. A jagged, sharp shape might warn of an argument or a health issue, while a smooth, rounded form could promise harmony and resolution. Much like reading tea leaves, the interpretation was highly personal and intuitive, relying on the diviner's ability to connect these abstract forms to the specific lives and questions of those present. What made hydromancy so remarkably popular across countless cultures, from rural Europe to the Middle East, was its profound accessibility. Unlike the horoscopes that required a full animal sacrifice or the ornithomancy that demanded years of training to understand avian flight patterns, hydromancy was a truly democratic oracle. Its tools were found in virtually every household, a candle and a bowl of water. This meant that divine guidance was not a luxury reserved for kings and generals. It was available to the farmer wondering about the harvest, the merchant's wife anxious for her husband's safe return from a journey, or the young couple hoping for a child. This domestic intimacy gave the practice a unique power. The prophecies felt immediate and personal, directly tied to the rhythms and concerns of daily life. There was no intermediary priest class. The interpretation was a family affair, a moment of shared wonder and contemplation that strengthened communal bonds and provided comfort and a sense of agency in a world full of uncertainties. The very simplicity of the ritual reinforced its authenticity. The gods were speaking through the ordinary materials of the home, proving that the divine was present not just in great temples, but in the humble warmth of the hearth. Despite its apparent simplicity, a truly accurate seromantic reading required a developed oracular skill that should not be underestimated. A novice might see only random blobs of wax, but an experienced practitioner could read an entire story in the subtle interplay of forms. They understood that the symbolism was multi-layered. The location of a specific shape within the bowl was critical. A formation huddled near the edge might signify a matter close to home or something coming to an end, while a shape floating boldly in the center pointed to a core issue of immediate importance. The thickness and opacity of the wax also held meaning. A thick, dense formation could indicate a situation with deep roots or a person of strong character, while a thin, almost translucent piece of wax might suggest a fleeting opportunity or a truth that was not yet fully revealed. This practice, therefore, beautifully bridged two worlds. It was accessible enough for anyone to perform, providing a tangible sense of participation in the mystical. Yet, to be done well, it demanded the same core skill possessed by the Pythia at Delphi or the dream interpreters of Epidaurus: the ability to quiet the analytical mind and allow the intuitive, pattern-seeking subconscious to rise to the fore, transforming random natural phenomena into a coherent, meaningful message. In the dancing shapes of solidified wax, people found a mirror for their own hopes and fears, a proof that even in the most common of substances, the universe was constantly writing its secrets for those willing to look closely enough. Our journey now leads us to a practice that finds profound power not in a natural element like water or fire, but in a human-made object designed to capture our own image. This is the 28th hidden practice, cataptromancy, the art of mirror gazing. Far beyond its mundane use for checking one's appearance, a mirror in the ancient world was considered a perilous and magical threshold, a polished surface that could, under the right conditions, become a window to other realms. The oracle practicing cataptromancy wasn't seeking a reflection of the physical world. They were trying to peer through the silvered glass into the world of spirits, ancestors, and future events, using the mirror as a tool for a kind of inverted sight that looked not outward but inward and beyond. The ritual setup was crucial and steeped in symbolism. This was not a practice performed in broad daylight. The most potent time for mirror gazing was under the light of a full moon, whose pale, celestial glow was believed to charge the reflective surface with otherworldly energy. Alternatively, the oracle would work in a pitch-black room, illuminated only by a single, flickering candle. The flame's dance would create shifting shadows and highlights on the mirror's surface, a visual catalyst for the trance state. The mirror itself was often made of highly polished bronze or silver, metals thought to have inherent mystical properties. Before beginning, the oracle would purify the mirror by passing it through the smoke of sacred herbs like mugwort or bay laurel, cleansing it of any lingering spiritual residue. They would then position the mirror so that it did not reflect their own face, but rather a blank wall or the night sky, creating a void, a blank slate upon which the visions could project themselves. The gaze was not one of focused attention, but a soft, defocused stare, much like in hydromancy, allowing the conscious mind to drift and the subconscious to project its imagery onto the shimmering, ambiguous surface. It was within this charged and liminal space that the most dramatic and feared aspect of cataptromancy resided: the breaking of the mirror. This was not an accident, it was a deliberate, high-stakes ritual act. The belief was that during an intense gazing session, a spirit or vision could become trapped within the reflective realm of the mirror itself. If the oracle was attempting to capture a specific spirit, perhaps to compel it to answer questions or to prevent it from causing harm, they might intentionally shatter the mirror at the peak of the ritual. The act of breaking was believed to shatter the spiritual prison, either releasing the captured entity or, in some traditions, permanently fracturing its essence and thus its power. The resulting shards were then treated with extreme caution. They might be gathered and buried at a crossroads to confuse the released spirit, or thrown into a flowing river to carry the captured energy away. However, the accidental breaking of a mirror during such a ritual was considered a catastrophe. It was seen as a violent rupture of the barrier between worlds, potentially releasing a malevolent or chaotic spirit into our realm without any control or intention. This belief is the deep, ancient root of the modern superstition that breaking a mirror brings 7 years of bad luck. The bad luck was originally understood as the lingering spiritual pollution and the vengeful attention of a disturbed entity now free to haunt the one who clumsily shattered its gateway. This view of the mirror as a gateway is what gave hydromancy its immense power and danger across multiple cultures. In ancient Greece, there are accounts of girls trying to catch a glimpse of their future husband's face by gazing into a mirror held over a well, using the deep, dark water to add a second layer of reflection and thus a deeper portal. In folk magic traditions across Europe, mirrors were routinely covered after a death in the household. The fear was that the soul of the departed, still clinging to its familiar home, might see its reflection and become trapped, unable to move on to the afterlife, or worse, that the mirror would become an open door for other, less welcome spirits to enter the world of the living. This practice transforms our understanding of the simple mirror from a passive object into an active, volatile participant in the spiritual landscape. It was a tool that demanded respect and skill, a silent pool that could show you not your own face, but the face of your fate, and whose glassy surface was all that stood between the comfort of the known world and the terrifying wonders that lay just on the other side. But of all the creatures co-opted for divination, perhaps none was more potent, more paradoxical, or more feared than the serpent, bringing us to our 29th hidden practice, hydromancy, the oracle of the snake. To understand why a creature that inspires such instinctive dread was also revered as the ultimate symbol of wisdom and divine communication, we must first shed our modern prejudices. In the ancient world, the snake was a being of profound duality. It was a creature of the earth, slithering through the soil and into dark crevices, and was thus a master of the underworld and the secrets of the dead. Yet it was also a creature of rebirth, famously shedding its skin in a powerful demonstration of renewal and immortality. This ability to traverse the boundaries between life and death, the seen and the unseen, made it the perfect intermediary for an oracle seeking to bridge the human and divine realms. Nowhere was this connection more foundational than at the very heart of Greek prophecy, the oracle of Delphi itself. Long before the temple was dedicated to Apollo, the site was sacred to a primordial earth goddess, often identified as Gaia, and her guardian was a monstrous serpent known as Python. This great dragon, born from the mud of the Great Flood, was said to coil around the sacred spring at Delphi, its very presence marking the spot as a place of immense chthonic power. The myth tells us that the sun god Apollo, seeking to establish his own oracle, descended from Mount Olympus and slew Python with his arrows. But this was not a simple act of conquest, it was a divine takeover. Apollo did not destroy the site's power, he harnessed it. He established his own temple directly over the serpent's lair, and his chief priestess took the name Pythia in honor of the slain creature. This foundational story reveals a critical truth. The prophetic power of Delphi was not born with Apollo. It was inherited from the earth and its original serpentine guardian. The Pythia, breathing the intoxicating fumes that rose from the same earth Python once guarded, was in a symbolic sense being possessed by the lingering spirit of the serpent, its ancient wisdom now channeled through the new god. The snake was not eliminated, it was absorbed, its chaotic, earth-bound power refined into the structured, celestial prophecy of Apollo. This sacred link between serpents and healing, another form of prophecy about the body's fate, was just as powerful. The cult of Asclepius, the god of medicine, was centered around the ritual of incubation we discussed earlier, but its most potent symbol was the staff entwined with a single serpent, the rod of Asclepius that remains a global emblem of medicine to this day. At his healing sanctuaries, like the one at Epidaurus, non-venomous snakes were allowed to roam freely through the halls where the sick slept. These were not seen as pests but as sacred agents of the god. It was believed that these serpents, with their intimate knowledge of the earth and its healing herbs, would lick the wounds of the afflicted or brush against them in the night, transmitting the god's healing power directly. The movement of the snakes among the sick was itself a form of ophiomancy. A serpent coiling around a particular limb was interpreted as the god marking it for healing, while a serpent retreating from a patient might be seen as a dire omen that their illness was beyond even divine help. The serpent in this context was a living, moving scalpel of the gods, its behavior a direct diagnostic tool. So, how exactly did a practical ophiomancy ritual work? While we lack detailed manuals, accounts suggest a process that was both mesmerizing and terrifying. A specific type of snake, often a non-venomous constrictor revered for its calm demeanor, would be kept within the temple precinct. When a seeker required a divination, the serpent would be brought forth, usually into a contained circular area. The oracle, or a specialized priest known as an ophiomancer, would then pose a question, often speaking it aloud or inscribing it on a lead tablet placed within the enclosure. All attention would then fix on the snake's subsequent movements. Every action was loaded with meaning. If the snake approached the seeker or the inscribed question, it was a powerful affirmative, a sign of the divine yes. If it retreated or turned away, the answer was a clear and negative no. But the interpretation went far deeper than simple approach or avoidance. The way the snake coiled was critically important. A tight, neat coil was a sign of stability and protection, suggesting the matter was secure. A loose, restless coiling could indicate uncertainty or underlying tensions. If the snake raised its head high, it was seen as a sign of vigilance, success, or a warning to pay close attention. If it flicked its tongue repeatedly toward a specific direction, it might be pointing toward the source of an opportunity or a threat. The serpent's behavior was a complex, non-verbal language, and the ophiomancer was its fluent translator, reading a divine narrative in the silent, sinuous dance of the snake. The deep, cross-cultural symbolism of the serpent is what gave ophiomancy its profound resonance. Beyond being a simple messenger, the snake was an embodiment of wisdom itself. Its subterranean existence gave it knowledge of hidden things, secrets, buried treasures, and the truths of the afterlife. Its ability to shed its skin made it a universal symbol of regeneration, healing, and the eternal cycle of life, death, and rebirth. This is why we find serpent deities and oracles across the ancient world, from the Egyptian Urias cobra protecting the pharaoh to the feathered serpent Kukulkan of the Maya. The snake was not merely an animal, it was an archetype, a physical manifestation of the life force of the earth and the hidden knowledge that lies just beneath the surface of our reality. To consult an oracle through the serpent was to tap directly into that primal, ancient current of wisdom, to ask a question of a creature that had witnessed the birth of the world and understood the secrets of its renewal. And so we arrive at the 30th and perhaps most masterful of all the hidden practices, a skill so crucial that it underpinned the very survival and authority of the great oracles for centuries. This was not a matter of inhaling fumes, reading entrails, or chanting spells. It was the sophisticated, psychological art of deliberate ambiguity, the crafting of prophecies in such a way that they could be interpreted in multiple, often contradictory ways. While the other 29 practices were the engine of revelation, this was the steering wheel and the brakes, a mechanism of self-preservation that ensured the oracle's pronouncements could never be pinned down as definitively false. The most famous oracles, like the Pythia at Delphi, were not fortune tellers. They were poets of the possible, architects of statements that would resonate with truth no matter how events actually unfolded. The classic textbook example of this genius at work is the story of King Croesus of Lydia, a tale so perfectly illustrative it has echoed down through the ages. In the 6th century BCE, Croesus, one of the wealthiest men in the world, was contemplating a war against the rising Persian Empire under Cyrus the Great. Being a pious man, he sent lavish gifts to the oracle of Delphi with a straightforward question: if he marched against the Persians, what would happen? The Pythia, after going through her sacred preparations, delivered a response that seemed like a golden promise. She declared that if Croesus crossed the river Halys, the boundary with Persia, he would destroy a great empire. Elated and filled with confidence, Croesus took this as a clear prophecy of his own victory. He raised his army, crossed the river, and engaged the Persians. The resulting battle was a stalemate, but instead of pressing his advantage, Croesus disbanded his army for the winter, assuming the campaign was won. Cyrus, however, did not disband his forces. He pursued Croesus back to his capital, Sardis, defeated him in a second battle, and captured the once great king. As Croesus sat in chains, watching his own empire be dismantled, he finally understood the chilling, double-edged nature of the prophecy. He had indeed destroyed a great empire. It just wasn't the one he had assumed. The oracle was technically, devastatingly correct. Her reputation was not just preserved, it was enhanced because the failure was not in her words but in the king's interpretation. This was not a one-off trick but a core principle of oracular speech. The prophecies were often delivered in poetic, dactylic hexameter, a formal and elevated style that naturally lent itself to metaphor and multiple meanings. The language was rich with symbols and conditional clauses, creating a kind of divine Rorschach test where the seeker's own hopes, fears, and biases would fill in the blanks. Another famous example involves the Athenians during the Persian Wars. When the massive army of Xerxes was advancing on their city, they consulted the Delphi oracle and received a terrifyingly bleak prophecy, speaking of walls of wood alone being saved. One interpretation, the obvious and despairing one, was that they should fortify the Acropolis with wooden palisades and prepare for a doomed last stand. But the Athenian leader Themistocles offered a brilliant alternative reading. He argued that the walls of wood were not fortifications at all, but their fleet of wooden ships. He convinced the city to evacuate and stake everything on a naval battle. This reinterpretation led directly to the Greek victory at the Battle of Salamis, a turning point in Western history. In this case, the oracle's ambiguous language did not cause a disaster but provided the conceptual space for a stroke of military genius to emerge. The prophecy was a catalyst for strategic thinking, not a simple roadmap. The strategic necessity of this ambiguity cannot be overstated. For the institution of the oracle being proven definitively wrong was an existential threat. A single, clear, and failed prediction could shatter the faith of pilgrims and the financial support of city-states, collapsing the entire religious and economic edifice built around the sanctuary. Ambiguity functioned as a perfect shield. It transferred the burden of responsibility from the oracle to the supplicant. The divine had spoken truly. It was human fallibility that had misread the signs. This system created a self-correcting feedback loop that reinforced the oracle's authority. When a prophecy appeared to come true, it was hailed as proof of the god's power. When it seemed to fail, it was dismissed as a human error in understanding. This clever use of language also gave the priests, who transcribed and often subtly shaped the Pythia's ravings, a powerful tool for political maneuvering. They could craft responses that maintained a delicate balance of power between rival city-states like Athens and Sparta, or avoid giving offense to a powerful ruler like Croesus while still not leading him into a catastrophic action that would reflect poorly on the oracle itself. The prophecy was a diplomatic tightrope, and ambiguity was the balancing pole. This 30th practice reveals the ancient oracles not as simple conduits of divine truth, but as sophisticated psychological and political operators. Their greatest hidden skill was an intimate understanding of human nature, our capacity for self-deception, our tendency to hear what we want to hear, and our powerful need to find narrative and meaning in the chaos of events. The oracle provided the raw material, the enigmatic verse, and humanity provided the confirmation bias. We see this same principle alive and well today in everything from vague horoscopes that can apply to anyone's week to the carefully worded predictions of financial pundits and political analysts. The timeless human desire for certainty in an uncertain world makes us complicit in the art of ambiguity. We actively collaborate in making the prophecy true by interpreting events to fit the prediction. And so, this final, most cerebral of the hidden practices brings our journey full circle. It connects the primal, ecstatic trance of the Pythia, breathing fumes from a crack in the earth, to the cool, calculating intelligence of the institution that sustained her. It was the marriage of divine mystery and human cunning that allowed these sacred sites to endure for 1,000 years, speaking in riddles that we are still, in our own ways, trying to solve today. And so, from the sacred delirium induced by volcanic fumes to the meticulous cartography of a sheep's liver, and from the dizzying collapse of a spinning seeker to the silent, sinuous dance of a temple snake, our journey through these 30 hidden practices reveals a world of staggering ingenuity and spiritual daring. What emerges is a portrait of the ancient oracle that is infinitely more complex and compelling than the simple image of a mystic passively channeling a god. These were active, disciplined practitioners, part chemist and part psychologist, part botanist and part stage director. They were masters of multi-sensory ritual, manipulating sight with reflective surfaces and shimmering water, sound with hypnotic chants, smell with intoxicating incense and fumes, touch with scorching bones and icy wax, and even taste through sacred fasts and potions. Their toolkit was the entire natural world and the human body itself, all orchestrated in a grand, sophisticated effort to pry answers from the silent cosmos. This incredible diversity of methods underscores a universal, driving human need. Every one of these practices, from the grand state ceremony of augury to the humble home ritual of hydromancy, was fundamentally an attempt to impose order on chaos. In a world governed by the unpredictable whims of weather, disease, and war, the belief that the universe was communicating through the flight of a bird, the crack in a bone, or the shape in a dream was a profound source of comfort and agency. It meant that the future was not a blank, terrifying void, but a text that could be read by those with the wisdom and the courage to learn its strange and varied languages. The oracles provided a crucial framework for decision-making, allowing individuals and entire civilizations to move forward with a sense of divine sanction, turning paralyzing uncertainty into actionable, if enigmatic, guidance. Ultimately, these 30 hidden doors into the ancient mind remind us that the longing to see beyond the horizon of the known is a thread woven deep into the fabric of our species. While our methods have changed, exchanging liver models for data models and sacred chickens for statistical probabilities, the fundamental quest remains the same. We are still pattern-seeking creatures, desperate to find meaning in the random, to hear a signal in the noise, and to feel connected to a larger intelligence that can help us navigate the mysteries of our own lives. The real legacy of the ancient oracles is not in the accuracy of their predictions, but in their breathtaking creativity and relentless determination in the face of the great unknown. They looked at the world around them and saw not a collection of random objects and events, but a living, breathing scripture filled with symbols waiting to be decoded. And that, perhaps, is the most fascinating prophecy of all, the enduring human conviction that the universe is speaking to us if only we learn how to listen. Now we turn the final question over to you. With 30 such varied and astonishing practices unveiled, from the binding power of cursed tablets to the democratic chants of hydromancy, which one captured your imagination the most? Was it the high-stakes drama of the sacred chickens, the psychological intensity of the labyrinthine necromantean, or the beautiful, simple magic of reading fate in a bowl of wax and water? Let us know which hidden practice you found most compelling down in the comments. But while we might imagine the ancient oracles as a relic of a distant, superstitious past, their legacy is far from dead. In fact, we are surrounded by their echoes every single day, often in forms so familiar we forget they are the direct descendants of those 30 hidden practices. The fundamental human drive that sent a king to Delphi or a farmer to a local dream interpreter, the longing for guidance, meaning, and a glimpse beyond the veil of the present has not vanished. It has simply been reinvented, its methods adapted to the language and technology of our time. Consider the simple act of checking your horoscope in a magazine or on a phone app. This is a direct, democratized continuation of the complex astrological charts and celestial observations that were once the sole domain of priests and kings. We may no longer believe Jupiter's position directly dictates the fate of empires, but the desire to align our personal lives with the cosmic dance of the planets is a thread that connects the modern reader to the ancient Babylonian astrologer, both seeking a pattern in the stars to illuminate the path ahead. We are still practicing a form of celestial divination. We've just made it accessible to everyone with an internet connection. Look at the immense popularity of tarot card readings. At its heart, this is a sophisticated form of cartomancy, a close cousin to the ancient practice of cleromancy or casting lots. The 78 cards of a tarot deck are not so different from the collection of inscribed knucklebones or marked stones used by our ancestors. Each card is a repository of powerful archetypes and symbols: the Fool for new beginnings, the Tower for sudden upheaval, the Lovers for relationship choices. When a reader shuffles the deck and lays out the cards in a spread, they are engaging in a ritual strikingly similar to the geomancer scattering pebbles on the ground or the lithomancer casting their sacred stones. The random arrangement is not seen as mere chance. It is interpreted as a meaningful snapshot of the querent's life, a story waiting to be decoded by someone who understands the symbolic language. This process directly mirrors the ancient belief that the divine will could be communicated through the seemingly chaotic fall of objects, and that a skilled interpreter could find the narrative hidden within the randomness. Perhaps the most profound modern parallel lies in the renewed exploration of psychedelic substances for healing and spiritual growth. The current clinical research into psilocybin for treating depression or the ceremonial use of ayahuasca in neo-shamanic retreats is a powerful echo of the 24th hidden practice, the use of sacred, mind-altering plants. The ancient oracle who carefully prepared a narcotic ointment from henbane and belladonna was seeking what modern psychonauts seek: a temporary dissolution of the ego, a journey beyond the confines of the ordinary self to access deeper wisdom and healing. The setting may have shifted from a dark temple chamber to a therapeutic clinic or a ceremonial maloka, but the intention is remarkably consistent. It is the belief that certain substances can serve as keys, unlocking doors of perception that remain firmly closed in our everyday consciousness, allowing us to confront inner demons, receive profound insights, and feel a sense of connection to something greater than ourselves. The modern trip sitter who guides someone through a psychedelic experience holds a role not unlike that of the priests who attended the Pythia, providing a safe container and helping to integrate the often chaotic visions into a coherent, meaningful message. Even our most casual, everyday behaviors carry the ghost of the oracle. When you can't decide between two job offers and you find yourself saying, "I'll sleep on it," you are invoking the spirit of dream incubation, trusting that your subconscious mind will work on the problem and deliver clarity. The frantic Googling of symptoms when you feel unwell is a form of modern-day diagnosis that, while based in science, fulfills the same psychological need for answers that sent an ancient Greek to the temple of Asclepius. And the pervasive culture of online quizzes that promise to tell you which city you should live in or what your personality type is. These are all lightweight, digital forms of divination, offering a sense of direction and identity through a series of algorithmically determined questions. We are, in 1,000 small ways, still seeking oracles. We have just traded the sacred spring for the smartphone, the flight of birds for the flip of a tarot card, and the intoxicating temple fumes for a guided psilocybin session. This enduring legacy proves that the methods may evolve, but the core human yearning that gave birth to the ancient oracles, the need to find meaning in the mystery, to feel guided in the chaos, and to believe that the universe might just be whispering its secrets to those who know how to listen, that is a thread that continues to weave its way through